Bum 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 bum. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Bum 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 ba da ba da ba da ba da ba. Ba ma da ba da ba 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 da ba da ba ba da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba da 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 da. How you guys doing today? Hola, Harry. How you doing, bud? I said Harry instead of Harry. That's funny. I don't know what I want to play. I am in the mood to play a song. Maybe I'll just do the simple, yeah, that's nice. Hey, Famita, how you doing? These times they are uncertain, of that there is no doubt, and nobody can tell me quite what it's all about. The heartbreak and the loneliness, the chaos and the fear will make even the strongest cry, I wish my ma was here. A young man on a battlefield fights for a rich man's gold. The bullet cracks into his spine, he knows he won't grow old. And as the tears come streaming down, at once his mind goes clear. The war was fought for nothing, he cries, I wish my ma was here. A lively story well in hand, a joke to soothe your soul. And when it came to arguing, she'd forgive and let it go. And when I cried, she held me, told me it's okay, my dear. And as we face these darkened days, I wish my ma was here. And as we march into the streets, as all the righteous do, we'll raise our voices to the sky. They cannot stop the truth. And as we tear their structures down, we'll raise a victory cheer. We made the world a better place, and I wish my ma was here. Yeah, we made the world a better place, and I wish my ma was here. Hey, Nova Scotia. Hey, Major. That's a nice red shirt. It's because you can't see the big giant hole in the back. This old thing. This shirt's actually like old and ratty, but it's all like in the back, so I keep it nice and hidden, right? I'm like American propaganda, right? Beautiful in the front, horrible in the back. Good to see you guys. Good to see you guys. Hope you had a good weekend. I know, 100. It's just 1,000.01 subscribers. Yeehaw! It seems to be just happening by itself. You know, I could just at this point, why am I even making content? I just let it grow by itself. Oh yeah, we're all. I feel like I'm hitting a point now. I feel like that because the big question is, when do I stop talking about this Russia-Ukraine situation, right? That song hit different today. Yeah, that's the beauty of the arts, right? Because what's actually changed, Famita, is you, and that's what makes art so beautiful. And every time you come back around to something, right, it's the same, right? You're the difference. And that's what makes that's what makes art so beautiful. You can go back and watch a movie. The movie that I do this with the most is The Princess Bride. I watch The Princess Bride once a year at least, right? And it's a funny one because it's just like a charming, like it's not making any kind of big statement, right? It's just very simply a simple story well told. That's fundamentally just about an old man telling a story to his grandson, right? Like that's really what it's all about. And in that way, it's just charming, and so every time I come back around to it, there's something new. There's something new to find out and discover and explore. And as I find out more about it, and then of course as I become older, right? When I was younger, it was all very much like adventure and swashbuckling and like all of that kind of stuff. And then as I'm getting older, I'm seeing it more as from the family standpoint, an old man connecting with his son, you know? And so that shifts the nature of the story and the nature of where things are. And that's the beauty of how art works and how the arts are, right? Is that it stays the same, but you're the thing that changes. And I recently had this experience with Starship Troopers, of all movies, right? That Starship Troopers, when I first watched it as a kid, I was just kind of like, this is just like a goofy action film, right? Like this is just a goofy like space movie, basically. And but now I watch it and I'm like, oh shit, this is like a scathing indictment of American society. Like just an absolute scathing indictment. Just by presenting what a fascist society would be like, right? Like the society of Starship Troopers is explicitly fascist. Like they teach it in their school that democracy has failed, that to become a full-fledged citizen you need to do military service. Their constant boogeymanning and false flagging of these bugs and aligning their whole society as a constant fight against existential terrors, which, if you actually watch the film, you're like, these bugs seem mainly benign, right? And then, of course, when we go to attack the bugs, we're so clueless. We don't know anything about them. We don't care to learn anything about them. We try to just overwhelm them with force. And it's a total disaster over and over again, right? And, like, just the insipid stupidity of the whole thing. Yeah, more overwhelmed with the world today. Yeah, tell me about it. I finally went and did I'm back to doing the daily walk around videos. I found today to be it's very difficult, because there's like I feel like Caitlin Johnstone is once again nailing it on the head, right? It's not okay for grown adults to think this way about Ukraine. And eventually there is going to come a point where we're going to have to stop talking about this. We're going to have to move on. John, did you get a chance to read the article on the WSWS I mentioned on Saturday? I honestly don't remember, Watson. Sorry. Good to see you. WSWS I mentioned on Saturday. What was the article about? What was the title of it? Let me look it up. Maybe that'll jog my memory. And I don't know, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Is this a movie? I've exhausted. I had to stop reading a lot of news. Yeah, Branwyn, you're posting a lot in the Discord, I see, and that's good. That's good. That's a way to kind of get it out, to get it to know that it's being seen and it's touching base, and it's just like getting to be like, are we actually going to come down from this? Are we ever going to have a moment of self-reflection? I think that's really what it is, you know? Like, it's one thing when you're going through these kinds of crises and everybody's working on how to resolve the crisis, right? Like, that's one thing. I think about, like, Cuba. That the Cuban people are, like, obviously poor, and they're obviously dealing with the world as they have to deal with it. But everyone's doing that, right? Everyone's dealing with it, and there's a great deal of solidarity, and I feel like it gives you a great deal of community and a great deal of, it takes a lot of the burden of existence off of your shoulders to know that everyone is moving forward together, right? And I think that's part of the nature of this channel, and why I think people come to this channel, and why we're all kind of growing together and moving together, is because we're all trying to share the burden and try to share and live in reality, you know? But it's when you're living in a society that is like deluding itself to this degree, where one group of people is saying that reality looks like this, and perhaps it does for them, right? Because wealth inequality has gotten so absurd that they can manufacture their own reality and surround themselves with yes men who never need to give them a counter narrative, right? And that'll last for as long as it can. And then you have another group of people who are living in another kind of reality, with the middle being torn in either direction. And it's just not tenable. And so that, I think, is what's most exhausting about it, and that's what Caitlin Johnstone is. Are you talking about this article, Famita? It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe the U.S. is pouring weapons into a foreign nation to defend freedom and democracy. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe serious military conflicts consist of good guys fighting bad guys, like a children's cartoon show. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe a war is being fought between an evil monster who is the same as Hitler and a virtuous, sexy comedian of surpassing bravery and wisdom. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe the same Western media institutions who've lied about every war are now telling the truth about this one. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe we're seeing an unprecedented wave of censorship because the European Union, Silicon Valley megacorporations, and TV service providers want to protect everyone from disinformation. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe Ukraine is just a scrappy little underdog acting completely independent of the dictates of the largest power structure on the planet. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe the globe-spanning power structure centralized around the United States is merely a passive witness to this war and not a key player in creating its emergence. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe the U.S. empire is ever the innocent little flower it pretends to be. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe that governments who'd have every incentive to lie to the public about what's happening on the ground in Ukraine are simply choosing not to do so. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe that politicians who've demonstrated ice-cold indifference to their own citizens dying of poverty and disease care passionately about the plight of the Ukrainian people. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 and believe the most powerful and murderous government in the world is orchestrating the economic collapse of a nation it has long targeted for destruction in order to defend Ukrainians. And it just keeps going. It just keeps going. It's not okay to be a grown adult in 2022 without reflecting on the possibility that things are not as they seem. Like, I'm seeing outright Nazi apologetics, which I've talked about on this stream at length, and I feel like Marvel movie brain rot. The WSWS is on the front page, starts with a letter to a friend. Okay, let me take a look. WSWS.org. Because I like the World Socialist website, for sure. And maybe a letter. Oh yeah, like right at the top. You know what? I haven't had the opportunity. You know what, Watson? I like the WSWS. I'm out of the hospital now. Good for you, Eric, bud. Hope you're well. Let's give this one a read. It's been a while since I've read this, read something online, but I like the World Socialist website. And if you're recommending it, let's go. Because there's so much with this Ukraine situation. And it is getting to the point now where people are wanting to have more robust conversation about it, I think. And the hysteria has to die down at some point. And if the escalation was going to happen, if we were going to be kicking into World War III, I think it probably would have happened already. Cross those fingers. A letter to a friend on the historical and political background to the war in Ukraine. The following letter was sent by WSWS International Editorial Board Chairman David North to a friend who requested his opinion on a recent online discussion held at a U.S. college on the Russia-Ukrainian war. Dear friend, thank you for bringing the online discussion on the Russia-Ukraine war to my attention and providing me with access to the campus event. I have now listened to the broadcast and will give you, as you have requested, my professional opinion on the presentation of two academics. I will concentrate on the remarks of the historian, with whose work in the field of Holocaust studies I am familiar. In any case, he made the most substantial comments. To be blunt, I was disappointed, if not surprised, by the superficial approach that was taken to this critical and dangerous turning point in world events. As you know, my evaluation of the war is that of one who has been active in the international socialist politics. The World Socialist website has publicly condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, this principled opposition from the political left has nothing in common with the grotesquely one-sided official US NATO propaganda narrative, which presents the invasion as an entirely unprovoked act of aggression by Russia. Momentous events such as wars and revolution invariably raise complex problems of causation. That is one of the reasons why the study of history is an indispensable foundation of serious political analysis. This general truth acquires exceptional importance in any discussion of Russia. This country was the site of arguably the most significant political event of the 20th century, the 1917 October Revolution, whose historical, political, and intellectual legacy still reverberates in our own time. The study of Soviet Union history remains critical to understanding the politics and problems of the contemporary world. Making this point is not a matter of political nostalgia. The initial remarks of the historian referenced briefly the final decades of the USSR and stressed the trauma caused by its dissolution. However, his emphasis on the impact of this event on the personal psychology of Vladimir Putin did not lead to a serious understanding of either Russia or the present war. He did not attempt to explain the socio-economic foundations of the regime that emerged from the decision of the Stalinist bureaucracy to liquidate the Soviet Union. Essential questions were not asked. In whose interest does Putin rule? What impact did the privatization of state assets have on the Russian capitalist elite's perception of its security interests? Comparing the foreign policy of Putin to that of the Soviet Union, what elements of its policies changed and what elements persisted? Geography is a persistent factor, and it is one that has haunted Russia, a country that has been the terrain of so many invasions, including, need I mention, the extermination war launched by Nazi Germany only 80 years ago, which claimed the lives of between 30 and 40 million citizens. The historian mentioned the impact on Putin of the mob scene outside Stasi headquarters in Berlin in 1989. I find it hard to believe that the incident affected him more than the enduring social recollection of the Great Patriotic War and its aftershocks. The catastrophe that began on June 22, 1941, is embedded in the collective consciousness of Russians. This is not a matter of justifying the nationalistic conclusions that are drawn by Putin, not to mention the ultra-right elements like Alexander Dugin from World War II. But the experience of World War II is more important in understanding Russian perceptions, including among workers, than supposed dreams of a lost empire. That being said, what I found most troubling about the webinar's discussion of the war was the absence of any reference to the wars that have been waged by the United States, often with its support of its NATO allies during the last 30 years. The entire coverage of this war in the media has been characterized by a level of hypocrisy that is disgusting. Even if one accepts as absolutely true all the crimes attributed to the Russians during the last month, they do not approach the scale of horrors inflicted by the United States and NATO on Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan, not to mention the other countries that have been on the receiving end of US bombings, missile strikes, and targeted killings. Based on what one sees and reads in the broadcast news and print media, one might form the impression that the United States has been overtaken by a virulent form of collective amnesia. Does no one remember shock and awe? If the Pentagon had planned the war on Ukraine, Kiev and Kharkiv would have been flattened in the first night of the war. The US media acted as if the attack on the maternity hospital in Mariupol, accepting as true the description of its contemporary use, that cost 3 lives was an act of unspeakable brutality. Has everyone forgotten the February 1991 US bombing of the Emiria air raid shelter on the outskirts of Baghdad that killed approximately 1,500 women and children? It is credibly estimated that the deaths caused by US wars of choice total more than 1 million, and the dying continues. Millions of children are starving in Afghanistan. Dark-skinned refugees from the disaster created in Libya by NATO bombs are still drowning in the Mediterranean. Is anyone paying attention to this? Are the lives of the people of Central Asia and the Middle East less precious than those of Europeans in Ukraine? Journalists who are now comparing Putin to Hitler seem to have forgotten that they themselves wrote during the air war on Serbia and the later invasion of Iraq. The historian referred to Thomas Friedman of the New York Times as a major geopolitical thinker. Let us recall what he wrote in April 23, 1999, during the US-NATO bombing of Serbia. But if NATO's only strength is that it can bomb forever, then it has to get every ounce out of that. Let's at least have a real air war. The idea that people are still holding rock concerts in Belgrade or going out for Sunday merry-go-round rides while their fellow Serbs are cleansing Kosovo is outrageous. It should be lights out in Belgrade. Every power grid, water pipe, bridge, road, and war-related factory has to be targeted. Like it or not, we are at war with the Serbian nation. The Serbs certainly think so. And the stakes have to be very clear. Every week you ravage Kosovo is another decade we will set your country back by pulverizing you. You want 1950? We can do 1950. You want 1389? We can do 1389 too. If we can frame the issue that way, Mr. Milosevic will blink, and we may have seen his first flutter yesterday. Allow me to recall the words of Washington Post columnist George Will, who is now frothing with rage over Putin's crimes. But this is what Will wrote during the U.S. invasion of Iraq in a column dated April 7th, 2004. Regime change, occupation, nation building, in a word, empire, are a bloody business. Now Americans must steel themselves for administrating the violence necessary to disarm or defeat Iraq's urban militias. 1 week later, on April 14th, 2004, Will unleashed another homicidal tirade in the Post. After Fallujah, it is clear that the first order of business for Marines and other U.S. forces is their basic business, inflicting deadly force. Will's columns were not exceptional. They were fairly typical of what U.S. pundits were writing at the time. But what has changed is the broader public reaction. At that time, opposition to U.S. wars and the foreign policy that fomented them was widespread. But it is difficult to find even traces of public opposition today. The examination of the aggressive foreign policy of the United States since the dissolution of the USSR is not only a matter of exposing American hypocrisy. How is it possible to understand Russian policies apart from an analysis of the global context within which they are formulated? Given the fact that the United States has waged war relentlessly, is it irrational for Putin to view the expansion of NATO with alarm? He and other Russian policymakers are certainly aware of the enormous strategic interest of the United States in the Black Sea region, the Caspian region, and for that matter, the Eurasian landmass. It is not exactly a secret that the late Zbigniew Brzezinski, look at that, look at this name, how's this for a brilliant name, and other leading U.S. geostrategists have long insisted that U.S. dominance of Eurasia, the so-called world island, is a decisive strategic objective. This imperative has become even more critical in the context of the U.S. escalating conflict with China. It is within this framework that the future of Ukraine has become a matter of great importance for the United States. Brzezinski stated explicitly that Russia, deprived of its influence in Ukraine, is reduced to the status of a minor power. More ominously, Brzezinski spoke openly of luring Russia into a war in Ukraine that would prove as self-destructive as the earlier Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. A review of the events leading up to the war, going back to the US-supported Maidan coup of 2014, strongly supports the argument that this objective has now been achieved. Again, The recognition that Russia perceived in the actions of the United States and NATO a serious threat is not a justification of the invasion, but should there not be a critical evaluation of how the policies of the United States led and even deliberately instigated it? In an essay posted online by Foreign Affairs on December 28, 2021, nearly 2 months before the invasion, analyst Dmitry Trenin wrote, specifically, the Kremlin could be satisfied if the U.S. government agreed to a formal long-term moratorium on expanding NATO and a commitment not to station an intermediate-range missiles in Europe. It might also be assuaged by a separate accord between Russia and NATO that would restrict military forces and activity where their territories meet, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Of course, it is an open question whether the Biden administration is willing to engage seriously with Russia. Opposition to any deal will be high in the United States because of domestic political polarization, and the fact that striking a deal with Putin opens the Biden administration to criticism that it is caving to an autocrat. Opposition will also be high in Europe, where leaders will feel that a negotiated settlement between Washington and Moscow leaves them on the sidelines. What Putin really wants in Ukraine, Russia seeks to stop NATO's expansion, not to annex more territory. If an agreement on the non-NATO status of Ukraine could have been secured, would that not have been preferable to the present situation? Can it be seriously argued that Russia had no reason to object to Ukraine's integration into NATO? Those who experienced the crisis of October 1962 remembered that it was triggered by the Soviet Union's placement of ballistic missiles in Cuba. Though this was done with the full consent of the Castro regime, President Kennedy made it clear that the United States would not accept a Soviet military presence in the Western Hemisphere, and was prepared to risk nuclear war over the issue. That was 60 years ago. Can anyone seriously believe that the Biden administration would act less aggressively if today, for example, Mexico or any other Caribbean or Latin American country entered into a military alliance with China, even one which claimed to be purely defensive? There is a further issue that was not seriously addressed. Both professors minimalized the continuing political and cultural influence of fascism in Ukraine, which is demonstrated in the renewed glorification of the mass murderer Stepan Bandera and the influence of the heavily armed paramilitary forces, such as the Azov Battalion, who identify with the horrifying legacy of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and its armed forces, the Ukrainista Provinska Armia, UPA. The critical role played by the OUN and UPA in the extermination of Ukrainian Jews is a matter of established historical fact. The most recent account of their genocidal crimes, Ukrainian nationalists in the Holocaust, OUN and UPA's participation in the destruction of Ukrainian Jewry, 1941 to 1944, by John Paul Himka, makes for very difficult reading. The horrors of World War II are not only a matter of history. I put "not only" in quotation marks because these two words should never be used when referring to events associated with crimes such as the Holocaust. It is well known that the cult of Stepan Bandera and the justification for all the crimes with which he is associated reemerged as a potent and extremely dangerous factor in the political and cultural life of Ukraine in the aftermath of the dissolution of the USSR. In his authoritative biography of Stepan Bandera, The Life and Afterlife of a Ukrainian Nationalist, Fascism, Genocide, and Cult, the historian Grzegorz Rosolinsky Lieb wrote that after 1991, Bandera and the Ukrainian revolutionary nationalists again became important elements of Western Ukrainian identity. Not only far-right activists, but also the mainstream of Western Ukrainian society, including high school teachers and university professors, considered Bandera to be a Ukrainian national hero, a freedom fighter, and a person who should be honored for his struggle against the Soviet Union. The post-Soviet memory politics in Ukraine completely ignored democratic values and did not develop any kind of non-apologetic approach to history. Page 553. Rosolinsky Lieb further reports, by 2009, about 30 Bandera monuments were unveiled in Western Ukraine, 4 Bandera museums were opened, and an unknown number of streets were renamed after him. The Bandera cult that appeared in post-Soviet Ukraine resembles that which the Ukrainian diaspora had practiced during the Cold War. The new enemies of the Banderites became Russian-speaking Eastern Ukrainians, Russians, Democrats, and occasionally Poles, Jews, and others. The spectrum of people who practice this cult is very wide. Among the Bandera admirers, one can find on the one hand far-right activists with shaved heads performing the fascist salute during their commemorations and arguing that the Holocaust was the brightest episode in Ukrainian history, and on the other hand, high school teachers and university professors. Oh, Milo. Milo, buddy. Do you not hear? We're having a very serious conversation over here. We're having a very serious conversation, and of course we need to pause for a minute to make sure that the pug has peanut butter. Isn't that always the way, right? Life asserts itself, doesn't it? There you go, my little guy. During the Cold War, the right-wing extremist Ukrainian lobby exerted substantial international influence, and especially in the former West Germany, the United States, and Canada. Until his assassination by the Soviet KGB in Munich in 1959, Bandera gave interviews that were broadcast in West Germany. The post-World War II career of Bandera's deputy, Jaroslav Stetsko, also deserves attention. He corresponded with Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco and attempted to obtain the support of the Third Reich for the free Ukrainian state that Stetsko proclaimed after the German invasion of the Soviet Union. This project proved unsuccessful, as the Nazi regime had no interest in satisfying the aspirations of the Ukrainian nationalists. Stetsko was taken into honorary captivity and brought to Berlin. In July 1941, he produced a statement in which he declared, "I consider Marxism to be a product of the Jewish mind, which, however, has been applied in practice in the Muscovite prison of peoples by the Muscovite Asiatic peoples with the assistance of Jews. Moscow and Jewry are Ukraine's greatest enemies and bearers of corruptive Bolshevik internationalist ideas. I therefore support the destruction of the Jews and the expedience of bringing German methods of exterminating Jewry to Ukraine, barring their assimilation and the like." Stetsko survived the war, became a well-known figure in international right-wing politics, and served as a board member of the World Anti-Communist League. Among the many tributes he received for his lifelong struggle against Marxism was being named an honorary citizen of the Canadian city of Winnipeg in 1966. That was not all. In 1983, reports Rosalinsky Listrib, Stetsko was invited to the Capitol and the White House, where George Bush and Ronald Reagan received the last premiere of a free Ukrainian state. Rosalinsky Lieb recalls yet another event. On 11 July 1982, during Captive Nations Week, the red and black flag of the OUNB, introduced at the Second Great Congress of the Ukrainian Nationalists in 1941, flew over the United States Capitol. It symbolized freedom and democracy, not ethnic purity and genocidal fascism. Nobody understood that it was the same flag that had flown from the Lviv City Hall and other buildings under which Jewish civilians were mistreated and killed in July 1941 by individuals who identified themselves with the flag. The international connections of Ukrainian neo-Nazis are intensely relevant to the present crisis. It has recently been revealed that Canadian officials met with members of the Azov Battalion, according to a report posted by the Ottawa Citizen on November 9, 2021. The Canadians met with and were briefed by leaders from the Azov Battalion on June 2018. The officials and diplomats did not object to the meeting and instead allowed themselves to be photographed with the battalion officials despite previous warnings that the unit saw itself as pro-Nazi. The Azov Battalion then used those photos for its online propaganda. Pointing out the Canadian delegation expressed hopes for further fruitful cooperation. The report continues. A year before the meeting, Canada's Joint Task Force Ukraine produced a briefing on the Azov Battalion, acknowledging its links to Nazi ideology. Multiple members of Azov have described themselves as Nazis, the Canadian officers warned in their 2017 briefing. Bernie Farber, head of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, said the Canadians should have immediately walked out of the Azov Battalion briefing. Canadian Armed Forces personnel do not meet with Nazis. Period. Full stop, Farber said. This is a horrendous mistake that shouldn't have been made. I would argue it's not a mistake. It was a decision, and they decided it. There is yet another disturbing axis of this story, which relates directly to the extremely aggressive anti-Russian policy of the Canadian government. Hold on, I'd like to clarify that thing I just said, in that it's not a mistake. They decided to do it. It's a moral, it's objectionably, like, horrible. It's not an oopsie do. It's evil. That's the word we're looking for, right? It's not a mistake. It's horrendously evil. They chose to do it, and what we're calling them out, not because they made an oopsie do mistakey do, but because they're evil. That's what's happening. There is yet another disturbing access of this story, which relates directly to the extremely aggressive anti-Russian policy of the Canadian government. Chrystia Freeland is the Canadian Deputy Prime Minister. Her grandfather, Mikhailo Chromiak, edited a Nazi newspaper called Krakowski Wiezy, Krakow News, and occupied Poland and then briefly in Vienna from 1940 to 1945. Of course, Deputy Prime Minister Freeland should not be held responsible for the sins and crimes of her grandfather, but serious questions have been raised about the influence of right-wing Ukrainian nationalism on her own political views, and therefore on the policies of the Canadian government. The National Post of Canada reported on March 2nd, 2022, Freeland joined several thousand demonstrators at pro-Ukraine rally in downtown Toronto. In a photo her office subsequently posted on Twitter, Freeland can be seen helping to hold up a red and black scarf bearing the slogan Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine. Observers were quick to note that red and black were the official colors of the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, a nationalist partisan group active during the Second World War. The media's reluctance to undertake an intensive investigation into Freeland's family connections and the broader connection between the Ukrainian far right and the Canadian government stands in stark contrast to the witch hunt aimed at suppressing all traces of Russian influence in the cultural life of the country. Earlier this month, the 20-year-old Russian piano virtuoso Alexander Melyofev, who is no way responsible for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, could not go ahead with recitals that had been scheduled in Vancouver and Montreal. A similar purge of Russian cultural influence is underway in the United States and throughout Europe. This degrading campaign, which is the negation of the cultural ties between the United States and Russia that began to flourish in the mid-1950s, despite the Cold War, should be seen as a manifestation of the very dangerous political and ideological impulses and motivations that are at work in the present crisis. Far from denouncing and opposing the anti-Russian hysteria, the intellectual and cultural institutions are, for the most part, adapting themselves to it. There is a final criticism that I must make of the webinar. There was no reference in the discussion to the extreme political and social crisis within the United States, as if the domestic situation had absolutely nothing to do with the very aggressive stance taken by the United States. Many serious studies of World War I and World War II have focused on what is known among historians as der Primat der Innenpolitik, the primacy of domestic politics. This interpretation, developed in the early 1930s by the left-wing German historian Eckhard Kehr, placed central emphasis on the role of domestic social conflicts on the formation of foreign policy. A careful consideration of Kehr's conceptions, which acquired great influence among subsequent generations of historians, is certainly necessary in analyzing the political motivations of the Biden administration. Since the turn of the decade, the United States has been shaken by two historic crises. One, the COVID-19 pandemic, and two, the attempted and nearly successful coup d'etat of January 6, 2021. Both of these events, even when viewed in isolation, have been traumatic experiences. In just 2 years, the United States has suffered, at minimum, 1 million deaths due to COVID-19, more than in any American war, and possibly greater than the total number of deaths suffered by Americans in all U.S. wars. The actual number of fatalities, based on a study of excess deaths, may be far greater. This means that an extraordinarily large number of Americans have experienced the loss of family members and close friends. More than 1 out of 100 Americans over the age of 65 has died. Millions of Americans have become infected, and a large but as yet uncalculated number of them are grappling with the effects of long COVID. Normal patterns of social life have been disrupted in ways that have never been experienced in the history of the United States. Protracted social isolation has intensified the problem of mental health, which was extremely serious even before the pandemic began. And worst of all, The United States has proven to be incapable of bringing this crisis to an end. The prioritization of economic interests over the protection of human life has prevented the implementation of the zero COVID policy that could have ended the pandemic. The extreme social, economic, and political contradictions developed within a society plagued by staggering levels of wealth and income inequality finally exploded on January 6, 2021. The President of the United States attempted to suppress the results of the 2020 election, overthrow the Constitution, and establish himself as an authoritarian dictator. Not since the Civil War has the American political system confronted such a fundamental political challenge, and those who either minimize the significance of the event or claim the crisis has been overcome are engaged in self-delusion. Biden himself acknowledged on the anniversary of Trump's attempted coup d'etat that it is not guaranteed that American democracy will still exist at the end of this decade. Is it really implausible to suggest that the interaction of these two crises has played a significant role in the formulation of American foreign policy? Would this be the first time that a government seized upon and even provoked an international crisis to deflect attention from intractable domestic problems? In concluding this letter, I must return to a point that I made earlier, that the study of Soviet Union is critical to an understanding of the current world situation. Amid the capitalist triumphalism that prevailed in the aftermath of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there was much fanciful talk of the end of history. Within the former Soviet Union, the equivalent of this self-deluding euphoria was the belief, especially among intellectuals and status-conscious professionals, that the restoration of capitalism would bring untold riches to Russia and a flowering of democracy. The unfulfilled dreams of the 1917 February Revolution would be realized. The bourgeoisie provisional government, overthrown by the Bolsheviks in October, would be reborn. All those with talent, ambition, and connections would become either rich entrepreneurs or, at least, members of a new and prosperous middle class. Wherever Marxism had put a minus, the newly minted petty bourgeoisie now put a plus mark. The second element of this euphoria was that Russia, having thrown off its revolutionary and utopian strivings, would be a normal country, welcomed lovingly into the community of Western nations. References to Lenin's writings on imperialism, not to mention those of Trotsky, were greeted with giggles. Russia had, at last, come to its senses, and no one took Marxist-Leninism seriously anymore. I should add that I encountered the same conceptions among Ukrainian academics that I met in Kiev. In any case, these great illusions in universal capitalist prosperity, a flowering of democracy, and the peaceful integration into the world system dominated by the United States have been totally shattered. Economic shock therapy and the collapse of 1998 bankrupted broad sections of the aspiring middle class. The democracy of which the middle class dreamt collapsed amid the bombardment of the Russian parliament in October 1993. Capitalist restoration produced a corrupt oligarchical system with massive social inequality, dominated by a semi-authoritarian Bonapartist regime. And finally, rather than being peacefully integrated into the community of nations, Russia found itself under relentless military and economic pressures from its Western partners. The promises it had received relating to the non-expansion of NATO proved worthless. Every effort made by Russia to assert its independent interests was met with economic sanctions and military threats. In the form of the Ukraine crisis, Russia is confronting the tragic and potentially catastrophic consequences of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Putin is seeking to overcome this crisis through thoroughly reactionary and politically bankrupt measures, that is, through a war that is aimed at strengthening the borders of the Russian national state. It is significant that Putin's war speech began with a denunciation of Lenin, the October Revolution, and the establishment of the USSR. Ironically, in his hatred of Marxism and Bolshevism, Putin's views were aligned completely with his NATO enemies. Rejecting the foreign policy of the Soviet Union, Putin is attempting to resurrect the foreign policy of Tsar Nicholas and appealing for support of Mother Russia. On the basis of this pathetically retrograde policy, he has produced a modern-day version of the disastrous Russo-Japanese War of 1904, which fatally undermined the Romanov regime and set Russia on the path of revolution. There is reason to believe that this war will lead to a similar outcome, but it will not be the type of revolution that the Biden administration will welcome. The Russian working class is a massively powerful social force, with an extraordinary and historically unequaled tradition of revolutionary struggle. Decades of political repression, the most criminal expression of which was the physical extermination during the Stalinist terror of the revolutionary Marxist intelligentsia and working class vanguard, separated the working class from this tradition. But this crisis completes the discrediting of the post-Soviet regime and will create the conditions for the renewal of socialist internationalism in Russia. It is not only Russia that the post-1991 illusions have been shattered. Within the United States and in all capitalist countries, the intersection of social, economic, and political crisis will produce a resurgence of opposition to capitalism and the reckless policies of imperialism that have brought the world to the threshold of nuclear war. Of course, the outcome that I foresee is not guaranteed, but I can envision no other progressive solution to the intensifying world crisis. The webinar discussion could not be expected to address comprehensively all of the complex issues posed by the eruption of the Russia-Ukraine war. However, to the extent that it reflects the discussions now taking place at colleges throughout the country, it typifies the dangerously uncritical and complacent attitude towards a crisis that threatens to develop into a catastrophe. I hope that the analysis presented by the World Socialist website will encourage serious scholars to speak out against the dangerous escalation and to use every means available to them to elevate public opinion by counterposing historical knowledge to jingoistic and warmongering propaganda. I hope that this letter more than adequately meets your request for my opinion of the webinar. With very best regards, David North. Very excellent comprehensive historical analysis. No mention of the Donbass War. This is something that I am really beginning to notice about the academics on the left, right? That they've spent so much time in their universities studying the history and all the long view kind of stuff that they don't actually know what's happening on the ground. Like, they know what happened 10 years ago, but they don't know what's happening today. Hey, we got to listen to everybody, bud. We got to listen to everybody. Like, yes, they're Trotskyists for sure. And you can see that right near the end here with sort of the analysis, if you like to call it that, of the end of the Soviet Union. The Great Purge is what he's referring to here. I mean, no mention of the political assassination that led to that, but whatever. These are ostensibly our allies, okay? And I don't really like to engage in this bashing of other leftists. Like, these are our allies. What is noticeable, and the thing I will critique, and I'm going to critique every leftist, and that includes people like Chris Hedges, that includes people like Noam Chomsky. No one's talking about the Donbass War. No one is talking about the Donbass War. Like, in this incredibly comprehensive historical analysis of NATO and Russia's role in it and Putin and all of this, right? A letter to a friend, no less. Like, so he's not trying to deceive anything or put forward a worldview, really. He's just trying to tell his friend what he thinks is going on. No mention whatsoever of the Donbass War. And if you're going to omit the Donbass War, right, like, you can say that, yes, 2014 was a coup by the United States. Yes, there are neo-Nazis. Still doesn't mean that it's okay for Russia to invade. As long as you're willing to exclude from your analysis, just don't talk about it, don't mention it, it didn't happen, it's non-event, right? It doesn't occur. You can focus on NATO aggression, right? You can just be like, yeah, NATO is aggressing. Still doesn't mean Putin should have invaded. Still doesn't mean he should have invaded. You can still wag your finger like this. You can still, let's not get into it, okay, guys? I will ban people. Hard line. You start talking about Trotskyism and Stalinism and all that in chat, I'm going to start banning people. Instant. I'm not interested. It's a boring conversation. I'm not interested. But if you exclude the Donbass War, as David North has, right? Why are we excluding the Donbass War? Like, the Donbass War is a serious moment. It's an extremely serious moment in this conflict. And as long as you pretend like it doesn't exist, you can make whatever claim you like, right? You can make any claim you like. You can seriously, you can say that Putin's a war criminal. You can say anything you like as long as you exclude this, like, Nazis shelling Russians on the Ukrainian border. And more as I read about it, and more as I contemplate this Donbass war situation, the more I realize and come to conclusions that Zelensky and this group, they never had control of these Nazis. Like, they never had control of these Nazis. That the Nazis rolled into the Donbass and started shelling them outside of any wishes from someone like Zelensky, outside of any wishes from any political apparatus whatsoever. Like, the Nazis are acting on their own accord, and no military force in Ukraine is willing to confront them or seriously fight them because they recognize that that would be a civil war, right? And so there are other articles articulating the issues in the Donbass. Great. Why isn't David North bringing it up? I'm deadly serious with this. Like, to not talk about the Donbass war, in my view, is like intellectual malfeasance at this point. Like it truly is. To try to create like a historical or political background to the war in Ukraine without talking about the Donbass, I think that you are discrediting yourself as a thinker at this stage in the game. Like, really, I think it's at that level. He wrote this on the 18th of March, so literally like 3 days ago. Like, and don't get me wrong, like, wonderful write-up, really good in terms of its NATO analysis. And I've said this of Chris Hedges. Like, I think Chris Hedges' analysis of like the NATO encroachment and all of that, I think it comes like it's we shouldn't expect everybody to know everything about everything that's happening in every region in the world, right? And I have to believe that someone like Chris Hedges just didn't know about the Donbass war. Like, just wasn't aware of it, right? Because it's, to me, it's been removed from the conversation, or people will say it in passing, and it's the thing. Like, what leads to the war? You can talk about NATO encroachment, you can talk about all this, you can talk over here on the side and all this. The Donbass war is what causes this war. Like, that's what's causing this war. That's what's drawing Putin in. That's what's creating this conflict. And as long as you omit it, then you can say that Putin's a war criminal and he shouldn't have done it all day long. Whereas my position, I've said it over and over again, I don't think Putin had a choice. Like, I really don't. Like, his options were allow Nazis to keep shelling Russians on his border or fight back. Like, that's where it comes from. And I don't think they have poor analysis, right? I think in this particular case, that's it's like anything, right? As long as you understand where it's coming from, as long as you understand the basis of their perspective, right? Then it's good. Like, that's why I'm fine with reading like state propaganda from all of the places, right? Russian state propaganda, Chinese state propaganda, Canada state propaganda, American state propaganda. Take it all in. Take it all in. As long as you know what it is you're looking at, right? As long as it is, you know who's backing it. Like, even like the Washington Post. Like, read the Washington Post, right? Off you go, right? It's Jeff Bezos' mouthpiece, but that's fine, right? Same thing with like the Globe and Mail. Read the Globe and Mail. It's the mouthpiece of David Thompson, but read it, right? Because it's going to give you a more robust view of what it is happening in the world, right? And just because there's like an incompletion or an incomplete narrative that's coming out, well, that's interesting in and of itself. And I'd be interested to hear someone like David North talk about something like the Donbass war. And I feel that way about lots of leftists. Lots of these people that are condemning Putin's actions and all of this kind of stuff, which, I mean, war sucks. Like, it blows that this is happening. Like, I'm not going to defend that. But I think that the anti-war position has a paradoxical problem on its hand, right? Like, no war, okay, but like, if someone walked over to you and started punching you in the face, you'd defend yourself, right? Like, right? And if you saw that happen to somebody and they defended themselves, you wouldn't condemn the person who defended himself as a war criminal, right? And I just feel like there's an exclusion of this, an incompletion in incomplete analysis, because a lot of these leftists, I think, don't want to go down the path of attempting to ostensibly defend Putin's actions. Whereas I'm completely fine with it. Like, I'm willing to call it for what it is. Like, if I was the leader of Russia, This is something I do all the time. I just put myself in the shoes of the person, right? If I'm Putin, like if I'm the leader of Russia and I'm seeing like Nazis shelling Russians on the border, yep, I'm for sure putting together military forces. I'm for sure. Like if I'm playing the video game of Putin and I'm the Russians, right? If I'm playing Civilization, right, and I'm fucking the Russians, right? And I'm there and I'm trying to, make sure my world is going well and like do everything that I got to do to make sure the cogs are moving. And then suddenly there's fucking Nazis, like literal Nazis, shelling cultural Russians along my border, right? I guess, oops, I'm just not going to pay any attention to that, right? That doesn't matter. Right? Oh, well, what are you going to do? Nazis shell people everywhere all the time, right? Like, I have no responsibility to pay attention to that. That's not overt terrorism occurring directly on my border. That's not the scariest fucking shit that's ever happened in my lifetime as the leader of this country, right? Like, really think about this on a basic human level, right? Nazis are shelling Russians on your border. That's the scariest thing that's ever happened to Putin ever, right? Ever. That's the scariest thing that's ever happened to Putin ever in the history of all of this shit, right? Like in his lifetime, without a doubt. And of course he's going to defend his border. Of course he's going to defend people who are culturally Russian, especially as they declare their own independence. Like, of course he's going to funnel resources into the Donbass region. And of course, eventually, he's going to have to invade because the trouble that he has is that the people of Donbass don't have the manpower and the military training and the funding and all of this to defend against Nazis who have NATO backing. Like, it's a proxy war by definition, and the complaint that seems to be coming down the pipe, including within leftist circles, is how dare Putin defend himself, right? Like, I consider this a defense. Like, do you genuinely think Putin wants this war to happen? Like, are you genuinely sitting there being like, yeah, Putin definitely wants to go to war, or Putin for sure wants to fight this? I don't think so at all. Like, I think that Putin didn't want this to happen at all, right? Like, it becomes like a hysterical kind of, it's that duality thing that happens in people's brains, where Putin is like this oligarchic, Machiavellian, like, all he wants is money and power for himself. Well, if that's all he wanted, then why would he want this war, right? He's lost wealth. He's lost power. He's lost prestige, right? He's lost position in the international community over this, right? Like, if all he wants to be, like, and again, if he's just like this psychopath oligarch that's interested in his own wealth, then fucking let the Nazis bomb these people, right? Who gives a shit, right? If you're just like this tyrant, right? But all of that distills from the conversation. All of that distills from the conversation the reality that Putin's a person, right? He's a fucking human being. And I just don't think that any human being could be put in that situation and come to any conclusion other than we got to do something about this, right? Like, you're the leader of the country. Like, you got to do something about this. Let's see what you guys are chatting about. I have people saying USSR were Nazi collaborators. Because imagine this. I know, right? What was it? The Mirov. I forget the name of it offhand, but I see that going around too. Yeah, because signing a non-aggression pact with somebody so that you don't go into a war is the same as allying with them. Like, this is how baby-brained these people are. That's a baby brain analysis. If you're literally walking around saying that non-aggression pacts are the same as allegiances, you are a Marvel baby brain who needs to stop talking. Like, you need to get out of the conversation because that's extremely childish. Like, it's extremely childish. Like, literally holding up your hand saying, like, hey, can we just not do war with one another? Can we just, like, not war? Right? That's the same as an allegiance. Like, no, it isn't. But by definition, it's not. Like, and why shouldn't the Soviet Union look at the Nazis and say, like, hey, can you not kill us? Can we agree not to kill each other? Right? Why shouldn't they do that? And of course, then that completely ignores The fact that the British tried to do the same thing, that the Soviets were trying to do non-aggression pacts and create agreements with Europe. Like, this is what's known as politics, right? This is the diplomacy that leftists always say that Putin should have done, right? So again, there's like a hysterical like paradox, a contradiction. So should Stalin not do diplomacy? Should he just not try diplomacy? So diplomacy's off the table as far as you're concerned, right? With your baby Marvel brain, right? Like you're literally saying, no, the Soviet Union should, what should they have done? So diplomacy's off the table. You've just said so, because creating any political agreement with the Nazis means that you are allied with them, which is the dumbest shit of life. So what should they have done? Preemptive strike, I guess. That's the American way of looking at it, right? So they should have launched a preemptive strike on the Nazis, not tried diplomacy whatsoever, right? It's just baby brain. Like, it really is. It's like baby, please stop talking brain. Like, all you do is watch Marvel movies, and that's how you look at the world. And it's the same kind of credible analysis as like somebody watching a football game, seeing the quarterback throw something and it doesn't quite meet the mark, and then the guy goes, "Oh, I would have made that throw." That's the same kind of analysis, right? Like, probably not, bro. Like, probably not, right? Yeah, completely overlook UK's non-aggression pact with the same said Nazis, all the lies of omission. Well, and also it refuses to acknowledge the reality that, like, they're trying to form non-aggression pacts and come to agreements, and none of them worked, right? Why didn't they work? Because you can't negotiate with Nazis, right? Nazism is a violent ideology by its definition. It explicitly and implicitly says, if we think we can defeat you with violence, we will. We will preemptively strike you. We will seize territory. If you let your guard down for a minute, we will get you. So the only reason a Nazi is negotiating with you is to deceive you into lowering your guard so they can attack you. That's literally the only reason a Nazi is talking to you in the first place, right? So, it's how would these people have been aware of this? How would they have formulated this, right? It's the height of backseat quarterbacking to say, well, Stalin should have... No, fuck you. Like, shut up. You literally don't know what Stalin should have done. Because you live in a world like where Marvel movies make fucking sense. Where like an arms dealer in a fucking Iron Man costume going around blowing up racist stereotypical versions of Muslims makes sense in your fucking stupid ass baby brain worldview. Like, get the fuck out of here. Did you see the Azov hostage piano video on Jen Zedong? The song being played was the Terminator theme song. Jesus. You can't discount the role of oil. With Crimea, Ukraine would have been Europe's second petrostate. Well, I mean, and don't get me wrong, like, people have said that the reason why Putin seizes Crimea the way he does post-2014 is very cynical. And I think that's there is an accurate... It's not inaccurate to say that, right? Like, Putin rolls into Crimea and seizes Crimea because, first of all, I think he sees it as an immediate military victory. Like, they have Russian troops stationed there. There's a military base there, right? So, like, him rolling in and seizing that territory is an instant win. Like, he's not going to get the pushback, right? Whereas he understood that going into the Donbass and attempting to do that would be a conflict. Like, that would lead to a further conflict. So, the taking of Crimea is decisive, not only militarily, but also politically. And then also, like, strict, like, resource base. Like, he gets a military base there. He gets heavy access to the sea there. Right? Like, it's a win on every front. And so to pretend like they're not thinking of it that way, I mean, yeah, of course they are. Like, of course they are. But that really kind of points to the way that Putin is operating. Like, Putin's not going to fight a battle he's going to lose, right? Like, the seizing of Crimea was an instant win. Like, if it hadn't been for this Donbass struggle and the subsequent thing, if everything had have died down after that, that would have been a huge win for Putin. Like, Putin would have seized that territory, gotten all access to those resources, right? It was an enormous moment. And, like, the fact that the people of Crimea themselves are like, yeah, we want to be with Russia, right? That's the end of that story, right? The story's over, right? Like, it's just coming down to, like, will Ukraine actually acknowledge it, right? And after this conflict, they will. Yeah, if the Nazis took Donbass, why would they stop at the Russian border? Yeah, right? Well, and I think what's super crucial to shifting your understanding of what's actually happening in this region is to understand that no one has control of these Nazis, right? And I think that's true from 2014 onward. That like the Nazis do the coup because the Nazis want to put their own people in, and they want to be able to have political freedom to do what they want. And then after that, they're not listening to Zelensky. They're not listening to the government. They're not listening to NATO. They are doing what they want to do. And that's a big reason why you can't fund these guys, right? Like the Nazis, you don't use Nazis. Nazis use you, right? And anytime you find yourself in a position where you're suddenly going to say, like, well, come on, use reason. You're talking to Nazis, bro. Like, they're already unreasonable by default, right? Already. So they're not going to listen to you, right? And once you understand that, like, because the conversation is so much focused on, like, Zelensky, NATO, and Russia, so Putin, Zelensky, and NATO are, like, the three pieces. Well, there is actually a fourth piece. And that fourth piece is the Nazis themselves. And the Nazis, like, I think if the Nazis were willing to surrender, this conflict would already be over, right? But the Nazis are not willing to surrender. The Nazis are fighting to the death. The Nazis are using human shields in Mariupol, right? The Nazis are using human shields in these cities, right? It's turning it into a long, protracted battle that the Russians will eventually win. Right? Simply through base siege war strategy, right? Eventually they run out of ammunition. It's just how it goes. And there is no like major counteroffensive coming in from NATO. There's nothing like that happening. So like if I do think if it was up to Zelensky, he'd already have negotiated a settlement. It would have already ended. But it's not up to Zelensky. There are Nazis in the conversation. And they can't declare surrender. Because if they declare surrender and the Nazis keep fighting, then everybody's going to be like, wait a minute, like you said surrender, but the fighting is still happening. Like what's the story here? Oh wait, there's Nazis, right? That's one of the economic reasons the Nazis invaded the USSR. Oil in the Caucasus. Yeah, it usually does come down to that kind of thing. Yeah, like Liebestrasse and anti-communism. It's a combination of things always, right? It is. Like it's never the case that it's always just one thing. Like even as I've been saying, like there's Nazis bombing Russians on the in Donbass and all that. Like that is still, in my view, that's like the most crucial thing, but it's not the only thing. But we have such an inverted way of looking at it that it's got to be for oil, it's got to be for resources, it's got to be for these sorts of things. And I'm like, I think national security probably counts. I think North, while not talking specifically about the Donbass, was saying that no one would expect from Putin considering the last 20 years. Well, not talking specifically about the Donbass, was saying that would one expect from Putin considering the last 20 years. I don't think I understand what you're saying here, Watson. Sorry, bud. Now we must discuss Putin's claim over the weekend about a purge of those Russians against this war as scum. I mean, people here in the West have definitely taken that as like a very overt fascist sort of claim, right? That proves Putin's desire to cleanse the society, right? Because society, he did say something along like the self-cleansing, I think is the line that he used. And, but I don't know, like, oh no, the Nazi sympathizers are leaving. Like that happened to my channel. When I started talking this way about Putin's war, I had a whole bunch of people leave. My channel experienced its largest decline it had ever experienced, right? And my position was good riddance. Bye-bye, Nazi sympathizers. Get out of here, Nazi sympathizers. If you're hearing what I'm saying, thinking, well, I don't know, the Nazis are better than the Russians, bye. Get out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Then I very much think like Putin's probably got the same kind of opinion. Could he have chosen his words a little bit more delicately? Perhaps. But I think that we would have interpreted it the same way anyway, right? Like, get the fuck out of here, Nazi sympathizers. We're not interested in you. What is weird is that people think Nazis in Ukraine who would have had NATO capabilities would not have done literally anything to justify war with Russia. I mean, people genuinely, even today, like even still, people want to believe that somehow the United States is a force for good in the world, right? They genuinely want to think that the United States is some kind of decent and good people, right? When they're clearly not. Like it's clearly we've gone off the rails, right? Milo, buddy, you want to come up? You just want pets and love. You just want pets and love. Who am I even talking to, right, buddy? I must be talking to you, right? Me and Milo have big chat sessions about Ukrainian politics. That's right. We're having big conversations about Ukrainian politics. Yeah. Isn't that right, Milo? Isn't that right? Huge conversations about geopolitics in the world, right? You're such a good listener, too, buddy. Yes, you are. You're such a good listener. What would I do without you listening to me about geopolitics, buddy? What would I do without you listening to me? You're such a cute guy. No. Too much emphasis is put on Putin. The major pressure was coming from below. Russians who have relatives and friends in the Donbass and know what's happening. He was politically forced to take action. I think that's true too, right? It's a lot of, this is the thing, right? Everybody is trying to act as though like it's like Putin and it's just like the face, like he might as well be fucking Hydra or Thanos, right? Like Putin might as well just be fucking Thanos. Like they've already compared him to Hitler, right? But like there's so much, it's like a much deeper and much richer thing that's happening. And that's another aspect of it, that there definitely are people pushing for this war in Russia. For God's sakes, here's a piece that comes from The National, right? So and you can hear it, like as I play this, like really listen to how we're talking about this, right? But they're talking about a gathering that happened in Russia. Like 200,000 people show up in favor of this war, right? Let's take a look.
In Moscow, tens of thousands joined in for carefully choreographed patriotism. They packed a soccer stadium and crowds outside surrounded it. It was made for...
They, of course, say tens of thousands, but real reports have it as high as 200,000 people.
State TV spectacular, and the letter Z was everywhere.
State TV's spectacular, right? Because they can't just say, like, wow, look at this upswell of popular support, right? Like, this is obviously popular. Right? No, it's got to be like orchestrated. These are all actors, right? These are all actors. These are paid actors, you guys, that we brought into the soccer stadium. These aren't citizens of a country who have their own worldview and have their own position on what's actually happening in the world. And then, of course, the constant focusing on this Z, which the West is desperate to convince people that this Z is the same as a swastika, when it has none of the same cultural significance. The emergence of this Z as a symbol is recent, very recent in the current conversation. I've done some analysis on this, and literally it's just like, it seems to have come out of the populace itself, that it's just like Z. Z is short for victory, and that's gotten picked up by the government, and they've run with it, right? It's not. I don't think it's terribly nefarious. Right, this idea that the Z is the same as the swastika is an absurdism, in my view.
It's marked on every Russian vehicle in Ukraine and has come to symbolize support for what's happening there.
But you look
Namely,
at this.
to liberate the people from this genocide of these sufferings, President Putin said in a rare public speech. But Russians watching at home didn't get to see the whole thing. State TV abruptly cut away mid-sentence, a mere technical glitch, the Kremlin later said.
Which is probably true, honestly.
200 kilometers to the east, in the community of Vladimir, a smaller gathering, but very much the same messaging. The Ukrainian people have to be liberated. My friend, a soldier, died there, this man says. They still haven't brought back his body. This is what is needed, this woman adds. It's the right decision of our president. But away from all of the flags and military symbols, a different perspective.
And I'm sorry about that war here, but we can't call it war. But it is, I think. It is.
The government is trying to control the narrative through language and images. Our CBC crew asked for permission.
It's so annoying. Like, she literally says this as if that's not what every government has ever tried to do. Like that's what's so annoying, I think, about this conversation that we're having now. is that the West is acting like it's like, what? Like, that's a thing that only the worst people in the world ever do. When like it's literally part of governing, right? Like, if you are trying to tell me that even the best, even the most, like, find a ruler that you actually think was like a really good ruler and was like, that guy actually did right by his people. He was fighting on behalf of his own people, always trying to do what was good, right? Didn't want to go to war, like all this kind of stuff, so on and so forth. He still had a propaganda guy. He still had a spy. Like, don't fucking fool yourself. Like, this idea that like we're watching this stuff and they're saying like, Putin's trying to control the narrative with language and imagery. And I'm like, yeah, like that's what you do. And it really indicates like how baby-brained we've become about this stuff and how childish this narrative has become when we're like pretending as though it's only the bad guys that do this. What are you, fucking stupid? Like, we all do this. Like, this is what we all do. We all foment national symbolism. We all try to control the narrative. We're all trying to present ourselves as the best we can possibly look like. Like, I mean, and moreover, I don't even think there's anything particularly sinister about this. I don't think it's like a deep, like, Orwellian, or it's a deep, like, obviously a nation is trying to make itself look the best it can look. Like, people do that. You do that. I do that. Everybody does this, right? You're trying to look the best that you can in the world to the degree that you care to look the best that you can in the world. And this idea that we're pointing it out of Russia as if it's like this horrible thing is unbelievable to me. But what this is confirming more than anything, like, there's an enormous amount of public support for this war in Russia. This idea that like the Russians themselves are against this and they're going to collapse Putin internally. Get fucked. Like, get completely fucked. Even if these are paid actors, get fucked. Your narrative's done, right? Like, that's over. As seen by the fact the initiative to recognize DPD-LPR was first started by the Communist Party. That's right. Yeah, there is even a narrative that's saying that Putin is having to respond to the leaders of the opposition, right? That the opposition party is starting to gain quite a bit of support in Russia, especially as the folly of neoliberalism is beginning to get writ large in the world. Like, Russia can't fall back on like dollar hegemony. Like, the United States has been able to keep moving forward with the neoliberal grift for as long as it has been because it has dollar hegemony, right? Which is a unique ability. It's something that it has that no one else has. And this conflict is going to collapse that hegemony, right? And the United States is going to start to collapse and look a lot more like a post-Soviet Russia with oligarchs and all the same, right? And I think that the populace itself is looking at this period of neoliberalism and basically going, this failed. Like, this doesn't work. Like, explain to me how this works at all. And I think Putin has to respond to it and is responding to it, right? And you can say that he's like an anti-Marxist or any of this kind of stuff. I do think he has like a Tsarist sort of worldview in my own kind of analysis of him, and I haven't done like the deepest analysis of Putin ever, but like, when I hear the guy talk, I'm like, this guy sounds like a Tsar, right? He doesn't sound like a communist. He doesn't sound like this kind of stuff. He's got a very like monarchical way of looking at the world and that he's the leader, right? And, but even with that, like, he still lives in a country that has a history of communism. He still lives in a country that has like, people still look at the Soviet Union with a certain degree of fondness. Right? Stalin is a very popular figure in Russia, right? Like, people still look at Stalin as a very, have a very nostalgic sort of pro-Stalinistic kind of view in Russia. And so this idea that Putin can just, like, ignore that, right? Of course he has to respond to it. Of course he has to. And so there's a lot of that kind of elements going on that people don't really, and it all hinges. It all comes down. And the reason why I'm pounding on this, guys, is that you can see, right? Like, David North is not a small commentator, okay? I just read this whole thing. He's editorial board chairman. So if you're on this website and you're looking at this commentary, which I do because I respect what their commentary, well, guess what they're not talking about? The Donbass War, which is the hinge of the whole story. The whole fucking story hinges on the Donbass war. And if you're not talking about it, then you're not telling the story, right? And everybody is doing this, right? The only commentator that I've actually seen routinely bring up the Donbass war and talk about it as seriously as it needs to be talked about is Aaron Maté. And very steadily, Aaron Maté is starting to recognize and realize that this is the hinge of the story, right? He's starting to put it together. I watched it happen. This guy would bring this up kind of off on the side as like an ancillary comment, right? And then very steadily, he would bring it up more like sooner in the conversation. And now he's starting to front load it. He's starting to see like, this is the hinge. This is the hinge of the whole story. And if you're not going to bring it up, if you're not going to talk about it, if you're not going to understand that, if you're not going to include it in the story, then you're just fucking baby-brained. Like, it's what matters. And obviously it's what matters. Look at the people. Why do you think the Russians are saying this is a good thing to do? Why do you think the Russians are saying that? Because there's Nazis bombing their people on their border. Like, you don't need a big fucking analysis. You don't need a big NATO thing. You don't need all this whole, like, well, historical analysis and encroachment, and they were afraid of it, and then there was this thing over here, and all this kind of, like, literally it comes down to Nazis bombing Russians on border. That's it. Like, that's it. It's not tough, right? Like, it's not tough to tell that story. It's super easy, but you have to tell it, right? And we just don't. Like, imagine telling the story of Harry Potter and you just omitted Voldemort. You were just like, yeah, you don't need Voldemort in that story. The whole hinge of the whole story. Nah, forget it. You don't need that. It's just some kid going around doing fucking magic all the time, right? You're like, okay, cool. Like, who gives a fuck, right? And then a bunch of his actions become psychotic, right? Because there's no force that he's actually working against. It's just like, but this is what we've done. And we know we've done it. Why else would we be going through this censorship shit, right? Why else would we be excluding people? Why else would we be trying to stop dissenting voices? Because we know that if the story of the Donbass war actually gets told, and if the populace begins to understand what's happening in the Donbass war, then the Americans once again look like psychopaths, because that's what they are. Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Transylvanian. If it was solely up to Putin and the oligarchs, they would have sold out the Donbass and made a deal. Now, I actually don't know if that's completely true, but I don't think they would have done this. Like, I don't think they were looking at this going like, oh boy, an opportunity to war. I don't think that's the case, right? Like, really, I think if it was up to them, yeah, they would have just cut some deal and like they just would have sacrificed these people and all of this, but like, and yes, pseudo-leftists claim diplomacy because eventually there comes a point where diplomacy fails. Like, it doesn't work, right? The idea of diplomacy pretends as though Putin wasn't trying to do diplomacy. Lukashenko implemented such a purge a while ago, cleaning House of Belarus of Western-funded NGOs, and Belarus is better off for it. Of course they are. Yeah, of course they are. Yeah, Nazi ideology is the most virulent. I hate it when it jumps down like that. I gotta find the thing. Oh my god. Nazi ideology is the most virulent form of fascism from a class perspective. It's not shocking NATO deals with them. Yeah. I saw an ultra-left communist on a forum recently try to argue that Stalin should have declared war on not just Nazi Germany, but also France, Britain, and the US. Yeah, dude, like, come on. Like, if you're arguing in favor of preemptive war, I just don't think you're a communist. Like, I really don't. Like, what I see of Stalin during that period of time is a man who's doing everything he can to solidify his own borders, to placate foreigners, and try to play nice with these foreigners and try to convince them that I'm going to allow your internal affairs to be resolved by your own internal people. Like, we're not going to interfere, right? We're not going to get involved in your internal politics. We're not going to get involved by any of that. And we're going to try to solidify our own border, be like, non-aggression, please. Like, this, we're happy with how things are. You don't need to come over here. We don't need to do a war. Like, we don't need a war. Do we need a war? Why do we need a war? Like, we don't need that, right? That's what I see during the Stalinist period. And this idea, again, that he should have, like, gone in and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is just baby brain backseat quarterbacking is what this is. Like, given the lens of history, given, like, the facts that you know, right, today, right, because you know that now you know that Hitler invades the Soviet Union. Like, you know that. But Stalin didn't know that. And if I'm Stalin, I'm definitely going to sit there being like, okay, what can I do to try to prevent the Nazis from doing this? And we can talk about how, like, well, the Nazis, it was an inevitability that the Nazis invaded. But again, no, it's not. It's not an inevitability that the Nazis invade. And if I'm Stalin, I'm going to do everything I can to try to prevent that from happening, right? And to try to pretend like that's evil, that's just some Marvel movie brain shit, right? Some people are just detached from reality. As you say, watch too many Marvel movies. Yeah, like, there's only good versus evil, and we're good because we say we're good, right? Like, Tony Stark is good because he's the protagonist. The name of the movie is Iron Man. He must be a good guy, right? The name of the movie is Batman. He must be the good guy, right? It's got to be the case that the title of the movie, there's Captain America, right? Captain Eugenics, right? He must be the good guy, right? Like, that's literally how they think. That's literally how these Marvel movies are. And it's infected our politics in serious ways. That if you even attempt to have the most modest of nuance, you just get called a Putin simp, and then you get banned off the Reddit or whatever. Yeah, and it's tactically stupid too. And also, like, inhuman, right? Like, you're committing to this enormous war of aggression, throwing your own people against it. And like, the first thing that all of these guys will tell you is how poorly equipped the Soviets were, right? The story of, like, yeah, they sent 2 men out with 1 rifle, and if one of them died, then the other took the rifle, and all kinds of stuff. And that's the force that you want to throw into the Russian, to the German war machine? Like, get completely fucked. Like, nah, man. Like, it's so fucking baby-brained. I'm just so over it. Tried to click on an article today about how Canada had to admit to allowing 2,000 SS officers into Canada in the 1950s. And guess what? Oop, article not found. Yeah. I keep seeing from liberals that Russia has lost the war because of supply issue. What are you fucking talking about? That's so dumb. And especially after today, because Belarus refused to transport their supply. Yet on the Russia side, it says the opposite. But again, we have the fog. No. That's dumb. It's dumb to believe that that Russia is not capable of supplying the front. Like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, what are you actually talking about? Like, really think about what that means. Like, really think about how dumb and baby brain that is. I keep using the words baby brain, but it's absolutely the case. Like, the front line is here, right? Russia can get troops and get all that kind of stuff here, as long as and like, all of its supplies are coming from its own supplies. And then on top of that, it's connected to the Belt and Road Initiative, which is right here. Supplies are going straight into Moscow and then distributed from Moscow out here. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's dumb. Like, that's beyond, like, that's next level dumb. Like, that's like, don't trust what that person has to say level. Like, that's like, how did you get your shoes on this morning level dumb. The idea that the Russians are not getting supplies, what are you talking about? The manufacturer for the entire world is right fucking here. What are you even talking about? Like, yikes. Why would he choose his words differently? It follows his nationalistic neo-Tsarist line. Yeah, you're right about that too. Like, and it is important for us to recognize that Putin's not like the greatest man in the world. Like, I talk about the Donbass conflict and him being drawn into it because he had to be, right? Like, that's what I look at. Like, I don't think that Putin stood up and said, this is the morally correct thing to do, and on behalf of Jesus Christ and Gandhi, we need to do, like, I think that he found himself in a position where it was do this or accept consequences that were far more dire, right? Like, I just don't think he had a choice. But that doesn't absolve him from his other shit, right? Yeah, what about the purge in the West of all media, not 100% alignment of the pro-Ukraine narrative? What about the wave of utterly unhinged hostility towards Russian people and Russian culture? I mean, yeah, like what I've got... what was the stupidest one that I saw recently? Oh, come on. I saw one recently that... Oh, yeah. Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, the first person in space, has been stripped of his honors by the Space Foundation in light of current world events. This is unhinged. Like, this is a type of frothing madness that like, the first human being, the first person that managed to get into space, one of the greatest achievements, if not the greatest achievement that humanity has ever created, comes out of Russia. And because years later, after he's already dead, years later, some other leader invades a country, right? You're going to strip this man of his honors. That's unhinged. That's deluded. You are living in a world where people with the ability to do this kind of stuff, right, are leaders, are scientists, people who are in charge of the Space Foundation, are doing this kind of unhinged psychopathic nonsense. Like, this is where we're at. Like, that we're not capable of thinking rationally anymore. We're just monkeys with nukes. That's all that's happening. I want to rifle through some of these because I think some of them are funny. This is not funny, by the way. Zelensky is decided to ban the activity of opposition party, the left opposition, Union of Left Forces, the Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine, Socialist Party of Ukraine, Socialist Party, amongst others. One of these that he's banning is the opposition. That the largest opposition party he just banned from participating in their elections. So much for elections in Ukraine, frankly. Like, from China, CGTN, right? Can you help me fight your friend so that I can concentrate on fighting you later? This has become the Chinese position in regards to Russia, right? That China is pretty aware that America just wants China's help to fight Russia so that they can crush China later, right? Yeah, Milo's upset about world politics as well. What about the social media influencer who's just imprisoned in, what was it, Latvia, with the accusation of being too pro-Russian? Yeah. Are these measures not authoritarian? Yeah. Censorship for thee, but not for me? Yeah. Not to mention the ban on all opposition parties in Ukraine. Yeah, you're ahead of me on that, Transylvanian. Yeah, and the decree to consolidate all media under one state umbrella. But that is excused with the argument that it's okay to do in a war. And also, we're the good guys, right? We're the good guys. So when we do it, it's good, right? It makes sense, and it's completely defensible when we do it because we're Captain America, right? Like, our name is on the movie, right? Yet Russia, also at war, has not done such drastic things. Well, yeah, think about that. Like, Russian television, like, the people that they allow on Russian television don't necessarily always, like, promote a pro-Russia line. Like, Chris Hedges, Richard Wolff, Lee Camp, right? Like, Abby Martin. Like, these people weren't, like, pounding the pulpit, like, pro-Putinist. Like, that's not what they were doing. Right? Like, it's pretty clear that there is a degree of dissenting opinion that is allowed on Russian state media. And I think that's one of the strengths of RT, frankly, is that they do allow people to go on and be like, hey, this Putin guy's a bit of an oligarch, don't you think? And Russian television is just like, yeah, correct. Yeah. What are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do? CBC state-affiliated propaganda accuses Russia of using check notes state-affiliated propaganda. On a lighter note, since CBC is an expert on genocide, body count of residential school children. Yeah, exactly, dude. You think the CBC might do a deep dive on Mrs. Freeland's family ties? Maybe, yeah. Guess where we discovered how many calories? Yeah, 200K paid actors. It's quite a feat, exactly. Like, Russia is both weak and strong, right? Like, they're losing control of the front and they can't get supplies to the front, but they can hire 200,000 actors. Like, the whole thing breaks apart real easily. Do you believe that he's the wealthiest person in the world? Putin? No. Putin's not the wealthiest person in the world. Like, that's kind of dumb, honestly. Like, I don't know where that comes from. Like, it's one of these conspiracy talking points that, like, Putin's the wealthiest person. How would that even work? Like, how would that even work? How? Have you heard of the Essence of Time movement? I have not. Macht, how you doing, bud? Looking forward to hearing you spit some fire. Have you heard of the Essence of Time movement? What's the Essence of Time movement, bud? Let's take a look. Essence of Time movement. Is a Russian movement founded and led by political scientist, philosopher, and theater director. Yeah, good for her. People who do theater, like theater and politics, are often intertwined. Sergei Korzhinin. The movement's ideology, a mixture of communism with Russian patriotic elements. Its manifesto says, all right. Like, I worry a little bit that there is, like, this merger of, that there are people, like the Nazbols here in America are trying to merge, like, communism and Nazism, basically, or fascism, into a cohesive ideology, which it can't be. I don't know enough about this to comment on it, but it kind of smacks of that a little bit. I wanted to show this picture really quickly to be like this is leadership from Brazil, Russia, Africa, China, of course, India. Like, doesn't this look like Team Diversity Squad? Like, isn't this like a liberal American wet dream right here? Oh, I know. Down you go. And like, here it is, right? It's wild to me. McDonald's closes 847 restaurants in Russia and left. The Russians turned the logo 90 degrees, named the new stores Uncle Vanya, which that's a character from Chekhov, very popular Russian playwright, Anton Chekhov. The assortment will remain the same in all stores, and the prices will be lower because only Russian ingredients will be used. Right? So it like, when capitalists say, well, if you do that, then we'll just leave, the response to it is, good, get out of here. Like, get the fuck out of here. They're keeping all the stores open. They're rebranding it, and with like a Russian character, and then everything's going to be better because they don't need to worry about these worthless capitalists anymore, right? Like, fucking brilliant. Also worth showing, right? They're starting to cleanse Wikipedia as well. It used to say that Azov Battalion was a neo-Nazi unit, and now they've cleansed that information from Wikipedia. Okay, Milo, buddy, you've had enough. Okay, calm down. Jeez. In other news, the death toll from colonialism, the coming of the Second Soviet Union. I doubt it. I doubt it. I think that it's probably more likely. Although, I mean, I don't know what to call anymore when it comes to Russia. Like, its next iteration, its next version of itself is going to be up to the Russian people, I think, to decide. That when the collapse of the Soviet Union happens, it happens because there's this kind of idea going on in the upper leadership, Gorbachev and Yeltsin, like a pro-Western, pro-American, pro-capitalist sort of view. And that sort of continues forward because the Russian leadership, at least, I think, saw that it could unify itself. It could become part of the international system. It could become part of the monetary system and the financial system. It even wanted to be part of NATO at one point, right? Imagine that world. Imagine a world where Russia actually does join up with the United States in NATO, and they do create that kind of alliance, and they do create that kind of understanding with one another, right? But they're roundly rejected. And now with this war, which is ostensibly a proxy war of Russia versus the United States, all of that is gone now. So this kind of Gorbachev-Yeltsin era of, and even in the early days of Putin, right? This idea that Russia is going to be able to form ranks with the United States, and that the United States is going to play nice, and that they're actually going to be part of the international community, has fallen apart, right? So much of the post-Soviet period in Russia, I think, hinges on this belief that we can be part of Europe, we can be part of that, right? And now I think Russia understands that that's not the case. That they are going to have to turn to China and India and other, like the global South, if they are interested in their own geopolitical security, right? Oh my God, Milo, you're losing your little mind here today, bud. Are you that desperate? Are you that desperate for a little peanut butter? Is that what it is? Are you desperate? My goodness. He's so extra today. That narrative seems to be Western projection. Nobody so far has been able to find where Putin keeps his supposed giant wealth he has. Yeah, it's all just conjecture. I haven't seen anything, right? Feel free to show me an article that says that Putin is wealthy. It's like, all I've ever seen is allegedly, supposedlys, right? I'm just like, not interested in that. The Federal Administration Court in Berlin has upheld a decision by the Federal Ministry of the Interior and Homeland, similar to the United States of Homeland Service, which lists Jungwelt, leftist newspaper, as communist-oriented newspaper and frequently makes reports of them because communism equals efforts and activities against the free democratic basic order. Court says it's not infringing on free speech and sees Jungwelt as a newspaper advocating for establishment of socialist communist social order according to Klax's. Have they been censored? Is that what happened here? As a communist. What's the thrust of the story? Have they been banned? Is it because Germany purging communists has a pretty bad ring to it? The Russians have been planning this for 8 years. Well, it takes a while to put together a military force to be able to do this. Look, it's not like that military force was a standing military. It's not like they were just like, rah, rah, let's go right off the bat. Takes a moment. Speaking of phony supply issue hysteria, CP has locked out its workers and business groups in the U.S., and Canada wants Trudeau to legislate them back to work. They fucking touched Gagarin? I agree with most of Putin's speech. It's worth hearing in full if you get the chance. Which one? The initial speech about Lenin and the oranges of Ukraine was overtly anti-communist. Yeah, that's true. Like, there is, like, I have seen lots of people. So, for example, someone like Russell Bentley, right? Russell Bentley, who's in Donbass and who's reporting from Donbass and who's fighting Nazis in Donbass. He believes that Putin is a communist, right? He thinks so. And so there are dissenting opinions all over the place because no one really knows. That's really the truth. Like, we're all just trying to find hints. It's not like Putin is really willing to stand up and be like, communism is evil and we need to destroy communism. But he's said a lot of things. Like, he's been critical of Lenin, and he's been critical of the communist period, right? Like, and very rarely praising the communist period. So it does seem to me like if I was a gambling man, if somebody said you have to bet $10, Putin, communism, yes, no, I'd be like, no. Putin wants to go back to kind of a Tsarist period. He wants to be like the leader of, he wants to be a king. He wants to be a monarch. Like, and I think he sees that as a preferable arrangement. The stuff Putin said about Donbass is pretty good. Yeah, he's got to talk about it, right? It's the reason they're there. The Pat Sock crowd of pure cringe. The nationalism of imperialist nations is inherently reactionary, can never be used for liberation like the nationalism of the colonized. Wikipedia goes back and forth. Someone will edit an article trying to sanitize it. Someone will restore it. Yeah, the CIA will win. Exactly. They control it. Yeah. My thoughts on patriotic socialists are neutral. I think it comes from a misinterpretation of Lenin, but it can be useful for the socialist movement, especially in second and third world countries. Mark, I'm kind of more like that, you know? Like, the way I view, like, the Nazbols here in the United States, like, I just think that they're, like, the high level of anti-communist propaganda that exists, like, you see these Westerners bending over backwards, trying to find a way to talk about ideals of communism and talk about these things without being communist, right? And they're doing that because they see the alienating aspect of it, and so they're trying hard to get it into the conversation while simultaneously being acceptable to the people they're talking to. And one of the ways that they're choosing to do this is by adopting the propaganda and iconography of the West. So if you wave an American flag, you can sneak your communism in underneath the flag, right? And I'm a bit like, I get it. Like I'm not ever going to do that. I'm not that proud of my country to be willing to do that. But I see why people are, and so I don't really want to condemn people for it, you know. And so I take a more neutral position as well. And I think I could be pushed off of it. If somebody really came after me on this point and we had like a fairly robust conversation, I think I could be pushed off of it. I'm not like a fundamentalist on it, but more or less I think that's my position about these guys. I think that they're trying I don't know how serious they like. And every single time I've encountered anybody who calls himself a Nazbol, they can get pushed off of it so easily. I just think that they're not that serious about it. Frankly, I think that it's born of more of desperation than anything. It comes out of the policies, the unmentionable person who started the degeneration of the Soviet Union in 1972, two-stage theory nonsense. Putin is considered wealthy because supposedly he can unilaterally spend Russia's resources. Like, again, supposedly, right? Like, oh, he can just like grab hold of it and do whatever he wants. Like, I'm just like, but doesn't that mean that like Biden is the wealthiest person in the world, right? Like, it's so weird. Basically, all communist publications and parties in Germany have always been under state surveillance, and the state is always trying to shut us down one way or the other by claiming we are against the liberal democratic basic order. Yeah, right? That liberal democracy is seen as like natural. That it's like this is the like if you just let people exist in the wild and didn't interfere, this is how they would be. And it's like, okay, but if that's the case, then what's the problem, right? Like if it's natural, then it should just win, right? The Federal Ministry of the Interior and Homeland is watching the newspaper, treating it like terrorist documents, and warning people to avoid the paper by labeling it as against the democratic basic order. Ugh. Like, oh no, a dissenting opinion, right? Like, this is the thing that kills me about this narrative, right? Like, is that instead of allowing people to air these dissenting opinions and then allowing people to vote along the lines that they believe are accurate given the opinions that they're seeing, right, they would prefer that this boils into a civil war. Like, that's essentially the argument, right? That we need to censor and exclude these people and don't give them a voice, don't let them be heard, until eventually the things that they're talking about reach such a boiling point that we have to actually use violence in order to fight back. Like, that's really what they're saying, and it's self-destructive and runs completely to the opposite of any kind of liberal democracy basic order narrative, right? The idea that people can say what they want to say and have their issues aired in public freely, and people can vote along those lines in order to put people in power to actually help alleviate the issues that everyone is talking about. Isn't that the whole point? Isn't that the whole idea, right? The peaceful transition of power, the peaceful resolution of class conflicts, of internal politics. But nope, that's not how these guys actually act, because it's all just fake, right? It's just an act, right? As long as you're willing to let the rich be rich and let the owners be owners, then you, as long as you're willing to not dissent on that point, right? This is why Jon Stewart. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I want to start talking about this more. Jon Stewart's show, right? Somebody said to me the other day, they're just like, well, of course you can have dissenting opinions in the United States. Take a look at Jon Stewart, right? And his show, The Problem. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, Jon Stewart does actually a pretty decent job of highlighting domestic issues, right? But he'll only ever really platform people, and he'll only ever talk about the resolution of these issues within the confines of the capitalist system itself. That the only path forward for a man like Jon Stewart is just vote better, right? That's the only solution that he's really willing to put on the table. And when he has people on his show, their solutions are like for example, he has somebody from the SEC on his show, the Security Exchange Commission, talking about the stock market, right? And of course, the SEC guy, his solution is, well, the SEC needs more funding and we need to have more robust policy making. And so we need people to put pressure on the politicians in order to get these things, and that'll be the resolution, right? And meanwhile, a guy like me is saying, like, the stock exchange is a fucking gambling casino run by the worst criminals in the world, which should be abolished completely, and the people who are playing with this funny money investor system should have all of that stripped, and we should use that in order to help people, right? That's not a solution you're going to hear on Jon Stewart's The Problem, right? So you can be a dissenting voice as long as your solution is do capitalism harder, right? As long as your solution is keep allowing the owners to be the owners, right? As long as that's your major capitulation, then they'll let you talk, right? That's why Jon Stewart has a show, because he and also like his explicitly pro-imperialist foreign policy lines, right? Explicitly platforming people who go along with the United States imperialist mindset. So as long as you're completely willing to do that, and your level of dissension exists within the framework of the capitalist state, that the owners should remain the owners, right? Then you can have a big television show like Jon Stewart and talk to the most important people in the world, right? Both of which are fairly based, even if the former were needlessly adventurous and more Maoist than MLs and ended up damaging the public image of communists. Imagine thinking America is capable of anything but colonization. Yeah, no kidding, eh? Like, America could. Like, this is what's so crazy about what America has done over the last, 80 years, right? America could have very easily been like, oh, we're the world's superpower. Let's build a whole bunch of infrastructure and a whole bunch of trade infrastructure and create systems where we just trade resources with each other and create a system based on these market principles, sure. But instead of going in and invading people and overthrowing their system, right, they could have said to these Latin American countries, right, they could have said to these guys, hey, we want some of these goods that you're talking about, right? Like you've got goods in here that we would like access to. What do we have to do to get you to a position where you are capable of creating these goods and sending them to us, and then we'll help. And essentially what I'm saying is they could do what China is doing, which is go into areas, help them build up infrastructure, help them build up their societies, right? So that they can start producing these goods so that they can join the global economy that they're talking about. Instead of that, they go in there, overthrow everybody, throw everything into the bin, right? Destroy people, torture people, blow the whole place up, right? And then force their only people, and then force United States corporations in there, right? So the United States corporations are the ones that are doing it, instead of building up the nation itself, right? It's explicitly colonial. And this is how America has operated on the world stage, and it's blowing up in their face in a big way. This Ukrainian conflict is starting to blow up their whole operation because China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia are starting to go a bit like this. They're a bit like, oh, like really? Like this is the guy? We really want this guy to be the leader of everything? Like this fucking psychopath, like fucking walking around just funding neo-Nazis, blowing everything up. Like explicitly going into regions, telling the UN that, you're an outdated institution, we don't need to listen to you. You're with us or against us. Like these fucking literal Nazis walking around the world stage, and this is who you want to be in control of the global world order or whatever, right? Like, maybe not, bro. Maybe not. Yeah, vote better equals vote for the Democratic Party. Ironically, it's the position of the DSA in the US. Yeah, like, Stewart is useful. Right, Stewart is useful for the Democrats because he funnels energy into this graveyard. Right, that's fundamentally what he does, and I don't know that he is aware that is how it works for him. I don't know to what degree he is aware of himself within the political structure. I desperately think he is trying to stay away from revolutionary conversation and revolutionary talk, right? I definitely think he's disinterested in that, and that's because he's comfortable, right? It's the same critique I have for these pseudo leftists on YouTube, right? They're not funneling energy into the streets or revolutionary anything because they're comfortable. The system's working for them, even as they critique it. Vote better in Canada is usually the nonsense we hear from the members of the Liberal Party when they screwed up and the cons win an election. Yeah. And I mean, and now we've got the NDP positioned so that even if they get in, they'll raise the tax rate on the wealthy by 2% or something, and that'll be considered justice. And all the NDP supporters will be like, yeah, we did it. We got him. Yeah, haha, we got him. And the wealthy will still walk away from the table with, hundreds of billions of dollars. They'll bitch and whine about the tax rate going up 2% or whatever. And everybody will act like it's a big win and everything's going to get better. And then in 5 years, we'll all be like, it's the same. It's exactly the fucking same. Because the NDP are controlled opposition. That's what they are. Only 2 countries always vote against the UN resolution. Teflon. Don't know if I've ever seen you here before. Good to see you, bud. Only 2 countries always vote against the UN resolution to condemn Nazism and all forms of discrimination. That's America and the Ukraine. Yeah. America always says it goes against their First Amendment. Yeah, that's hilarious. right? Like, if that's what's so funny about the Americans' like First Amendment thing. It's like, oh yeah, you can't condemn Nazis, goes against the First Amendment, but you start talking communism, yeah, of course the world does not revolve around the U.S. Constitution. And all the global North countries abstained while everyone else, the global South, voted in favor to a man, yeah. Don't forget Brazil, where it's looking almost inevitable that Lula will win the next elections until some huge manipulation happens, yeah. Or he's outright imprisoned again. I would put neither past them. I don't know, though. I don't know. Like, there's an exhaustion setting in. There's an exhaustion setting in that even people in positions of power have got to start seeing that this neoliberal order is not working, right? And it isn't. Like, it's even on its own terms, it's not working. Like, the wealth extraction project is resulting in enormous chaos, right? And it's only getting worse. Like, it's only getting worse. And people in the global South especially have got to be saying, like, hey, like, this is exhausting. Like, this is unacceptable. And eventually there does come a point where, like, you do kind of gotta start wondering, like, well, what would be the worst thing if Lula got in? Like, what would be the worst thing? I'm not going to be not a billionaire, right? Like, the billionaire class that exists, right? Like, a lot of them are kind of have got to be looking at leadership that's trying to move in a more socialist way. And some of them have got to start be saying, like, well, I'm still going to be a billionaire. Like, oh no, I'm going to make like 5% less this next year. So what's it matter? Right? Like, I have to start believing that some of this is starting to penetrate, that they aren't just like a Skeletor level, like Sauron level, just demonic evil force. That some of these guys have got to be softening in some way, where they're starting to go like, oh, you know, it's pretty clear some of this isn't working. Like, we can't just keep believing that impoverishing everybody is going to equal freedom, right? Like, it's just not real. You even have like the president of the United States, Joe Biden, even though I think he's only saying it cynically, but he's saying that trickle-down economics doesn't work, right? Like, that's not insignificant. That's not an insignificant moment. So, like, if they continue to try to undercut, like, socialists in Brazil and socialists across South America and all of this kind of stuff, if they continue to do this shit, like, there does come a point where it becomes just self-destructive, right? That, like, and it has been completely self-destructive, right? The global South is going to band together and exclude America. That's what's coming. And it's going to be devastating. That it's going to be no different than all of the people, all of the workers in a factory standing up and excluding the capitalists. It's going to be a revolt, complete and total. And the Americans have only been able to get this game working for them because they've been able to one-to-one. They've been able to talk to these organizations and these nations on a one-to-one level. And they've never had the institutional or administrative power to be able to actually form up and do anything about it. And if they had started to, the Americans could come in and blow it up. But now it's happening too fast, and the Americans can't keep control of it. And these international alliances and these systems that are starting to come up underneath America are starting to form up faster than America can respond to it. America has only so many weapons. It has only so many bombs that it can blow everybody up with. And eventually there just comes a point where, and the major problem that America is faced with is that it doesn't produce anything. That the only reason it's been able to continue doing what it's doing is because of its dollar hegemony. That if you as a global South country wanted to trade in oil, you had to trade in American dollars. That was the rule. You couldn't do it any other way. And that was enforced with military force. Like, the United States would come in and blow your country up if you started to talk otherwise. But now you've got major players. Saudi Arabia has said it's willing to trade oil in the yuan. That's the end of the dollar hegemony. And it's the literal only advantage outside of its military supremacy that the United States has had, right? So we're entering a world here where the people who make everything are starting to say, we're not going to trade in the dollar any longer. And the people who produce dollars, i.e. the United States, don't actually make anything, right? This is going to lead to a complete collapse of dollar hegemony. It's going to lead to a complete collapse of the dollar as this world-dominating international currency. And the United States is just going to be standing there with its dick in its hand. And it's going to be saying, hey, can we trade for some of these goods? Can we trade for some of this stuff? And the rest of the world is going to say, you don't have anything we need or want. And incidentally, you've been assholes to us the whole time, so go fuck yourself. Which is just going to lead to this enormous decline as the United States. And I would be talking a little bit differently, by the way. If the United States was doing anything about it. Like, if the United States was building up its manufacturing base, right? If the United States was actually attempting to get a manufacturing base going and trying to get everything back so that it could actually produce something and create something of value, right? But it's not. It's simply not, right? America's going to enter 100 years of humiliation. And the Civil War is going to be brutal. I seen your video on Reddit, came to your YouTube channel, subscribe now. Teflon. Hey, this button here, you could give me some money, right? If the spirit takes you. Good time to say to everybody, like, share, subscribe, right? My Patreon gets you into the Discord where we have robust conversations and share things in the interim, right? We are a solidarity movement. We are trying to keep things going, right? Trying to keep everybody fucking sane while we collapse. It really is a clash of civilizations. Yeah, the difference, in my opinion, look at these, is that it's a clash of civilizations, but one of them is an actual civilization and the other one is cosplaying as a civilization. That's the difference. Like, the United States is just like cosplaying a civilization. It's not a real civilization, right? Like, one would assume that one of the base premises of any civilization is make sure everybody has food and shelter. Like, it's why I don't think the U.S. will collapse into socialism. No. The U.S. is, I've seen this thing going around, right? Where it's socialism or barbarism. You saw that a lot with the Bernie Sanders campaign, right? Socialism or barbarism. Well, the United States chose barbarism. Like, and it really is time for us to acknowledge it. This Ukraine conflict proves it. Like, it shows it explicitly. If you didn't buy into that idea previously, like, we're willing to bro down with neo-Nazis. Like, it's and if you point it out, huge sections of the populace will be like, yeah, but there are neo-Nazis, so they're good. Like, that's what the conversation is. So we've chosen barbarism, and it's not getting better. Like, and how do I know it's not going to get better? Because we're not trying to make it better. We're not actually doing anything to make it better. The best we've seen from anybody is a just base acknowledgement that, like, oh yeah, trickle-down economics doesn't work. We're going to keep doing it, though. We're going to keep doing it, but, it doesn't work. But we're going to keep doing it, right? So it's going to get worse. Yep. Brazil is what the leaders want for the U.S. Poor population, super wealthy ruling class. Yeah. Never mind the internal issues in the U.S. make it hollowed out shell of its former self, leaving it incapable of responding to a mass international movement. Oh, yeah. Like, I do think that the United States is destined for a balkanization. Just because of the way its state system works, right? Like, it's a state system. That the federal government will eventually be seen as, and it's only going to have to be, like, one of the big states, like Texas. In my view, Texas is the one that, like, people are going to start asking themselves in serious ways, and have been asking themselves in serious ways, why am I paying taxes to an institution that gives me nothing except hatred on the international stage? Like, all this institution does is make people hate us. That's all it does. Why am I giving money to that? And if somebody stands up and says, hey, should we just declare our independence from this illegitimate federal system? I think there's going to be a lot of people, and I know there's a lot of people who are already saying, like, yeah, I'd be in favor of that. Because for the citizens of a place like Texas or California or any of these states, right, all it is a loss of income for them. It's just a tax, right? They don't see anything beneficial. It doesn't manifest in their lives in any way meaningful, right? And as we move forward, it's just going to get dumber, right? That the society is going to fray more and more, and people are just going to see the United States federal government as a burden, that and as an institution that has lost the thread, that has lost the ability, and has turned against its own citizens, which it has, like it definitely has. And so you're going to see a lot of these states start to balkanize, and eventually the United States federal government will begin to shrink over time because it won't be able to sustain itself any longer. And then very steadily it'll probably fade, and then it'll kind of go back to the similar sort of 13 colonies kind of situation where you have like New York and like those smaller ones up in the north east, right? Up in the northeast. And so that'll be the United States federal government. That'll become the United States of America. And then the southern states will be its own thing, right? And the South will rise again. Like, everybody acts like, oh, the Confederate War was over, they fought a union, and that's the end of it. If you're a Southerner, you don't think that way, right? And when they say the South will rise again, they're not saying that because it's just catchy, right? The southern states, they want to be their own independent thing. Right? That's why they talk that way. That's why they wave the Confederate flag, right? Like, the North is correct when it goes after the South for flying the Confederate flag because it is a symbolism of slavery. But the people who are flying the Confederate flag, they see it as a symbol of their independence, right? That they're not necessarily flying the Confederate flag to be like, we should re-erect slave systems. Although, let's be honest, every American thinks that slave systems are fine. It's just how you dispense the slavery, right? So a slave system through a prison system is acceptable across the board. A wage slave system is acceptable across the board. The conversation between the North and the South is whether or not somebody should be directly owned, right? Like whether or not you can just buy somebody and own them directly is the problem. Can you rent them? Can we enslave prisoners? Everybody agrees that that's the case, right? The big conversation that goes on is, can I put $100 on the table and own a person, right? And John, do you have a good source on the Donbass War? Honestly, Famita? I mean, go to YouTube. Donbass War documentary. Yeah, if you could spell. Pick one. I see they removed the RT one. Right? There's also, you're not going to find this one on YouTube, but Oliver Stone, Ukraine on fire. You're not going to find this one on YouTube because it's been basically purged. But if you try to, you can find Ukraine on fire. You can find Oliver Stone's Ukraine on fire. Like, that's go to the places. You know what places I'm talking about. Oliver Stone's Ukraine on fire. It's got interviews with Putin himself. It's got interviews with people on the ground. The RT documentary, I'm not surprised they purged it. I wish I had have actually downloaded it. I knew they were going to purge it. I don't know why I didn't. But like, for God's sakes, like, French reporter exposes the atrocity towards Ukrainians in the Donbass. So they've been able to purge. They've been able to purge the Russian sources and the Russian documentaries, but they're not willing to purge European sources, right? And I wonder. Oh, is that it right there? Actually, yeah. This right here is my go-to. This is part 2. I should download this. I should get this off the internet because this is really, really good stuff. This is part 2. I like part 1. Maybe I'm lucky. Maybe I'm just going to be lucky. Looks like people are trying to re-upload it. So I'm going to pull this one down tonight. Going to try and see if I can find part 1. Because part 1, they have literal footage of the Ukrainian military shooting Hellfire missiles at the Donbass airport. Like, it's very condemning. But because it's got RT on it, it gets purged, right? But still, even that aside, this documentary, I just had it. Even this Battle of Donetsk Airport, intense combat footage, heavy clashes, fighting, like oh, there it is. Ukraine Donbass. This right here. Yeah, looks like it's getting re-uploaded, right? 90 views, right? So they're pulling it off and people are putting it back on. I highly recommend this one. I can show you straight out, like interviews with people talking about it. This woman worked at the airport. She this is a literal confessional. Here is the footage. Is it here? This is done it. No, it's before this. Yeah, here it is. Here it is.
Сказал эти слова, в небе Донецка появилась военная авиация.
There's a Ukrainian helicopter flying over Donetsk, right? Shooting missiles directly into the airport. This is the start of the Donbass war. This is the beginning of it, right? That they destroy the airport for two major reasons. Reason number one, it prevents anybody from getting in and providing any kind of support. So if the Russians want to get into this airport and actually land there, they can't anymore. Because not only is it destroyed, it's also occupied. And the reason why they occupy it is because it has infrastructure in it that allows them to get an overview of the city to be able to pick targets and shell them, which you can see the Donbass military fighting back against later on in the documentary, where they're literally shelling it from afar, right? This is a battle for Donetsk airport, right? Here's the people of Donbass shooting at their own airport because it's been occupied by the Russians. I gotta pull these documentaries down now that I know, and I knew it before. I was just kind of, I feel like I've been stunned, you know, like I feel like I'm coming out of a daze. You know what I mean? Like I feel like this last week I've just kind of been walking around in something of a stupor, and I just feel like I'm coming out of it now. That I've just been like not shell shocked, that's aggressive, but like it's on that kind of line where it's just been like a stunned sort of thing, and I haven't been able to respond in any kind of reasonable way. I got to pull these documentaries down because these documentaries, like, you can't, if you watch this and you still walk away thinking that like what we're doing in this region is perfectly acceptable, then you're a fucking Nazi. There's no other way to talk about it, right? You got footage of like literal like rocket fire, the shelling aftermath, right? This is in August 8th, 2014. This guy's talking about how his entire settlement got eliminated. His entire settlement got cleansed, right? Like, it's just like absolutely incredible what's going on there, and no one talks about it. You're just not allowed to know it exists. But it's so well reported that you don't even need the Russian documentaries, right? The Russian documentaries are the best ones, of course, because they're the ones that were on the ground right away. They were the ones that got like film crews in straight away to be able to capture the documentaries, to be able to capture footage of helicopters shooting the airport, right? Like that kind of shit. So they're the best ones. But you can't create a justification for why should we remove the French documentary? Like, why should we remove the British documentary, right? Like, there have been a lot of people have been documenting the Donbass war. We just don't talk about it. So that's what I suggest. This, in my view, is the one. So I'm gonna put it in. Come on now. I'm gonna put it in. Not surprised to see it got removed because it's very effective. And after this stream, I'm gonna pull this one down because we need to have access to this. And if it gets pulled down again, I'm gonna put it back up because we have to keep spreading this one down. Hey, Victini, how you doing, bud? Can we talk about labor in Canada? If you like, bud. YouTube channel name Donbass Tragedy also posted an excellent documentary. Amazing. Donbass Tragedy. Of course, it's not coming up. Did I misspell tragedy? I think I did. Donbass Tragedy. Yeah, looks like that channel's just not popping up. No fucking surprise there. Yeah, no fucking surprise there. No surprise that they're not letting me search that up, right? Unless I'm spelling it wrong, which I am. Tragedy. And I'm spelling it wrong again. Why am I spelling this wrong? My brain is not working. Tragedy. I'm spelling this word so badly. Tragedy. Yeah, I was right. Oh, it'd be helpful if I put the R in the right spot. Yeah, channel's simply not popping up. No big fucking surprise here. Right? Maybe if I do a Google search for it. Donbass Tragedy YouTube channel. Yeah, no fucking surprise at all, eh? This re-uploading tactic won't work forever. Eventually, they'll have an automated AI trained to recognize these banned videos. Yeah, I think you're right. Download and go to alternative platforms. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's just not coming up, bud. National borders have been moved and changed many times during the history of civilization. It's North American hubris to believe the U.S. Yeah. And Canada's territorial map will be 1,000-year Reich. Exactly. Yeah, there's labor in Canada? CP is claiming it's a work stoppage and the Teamster members are Putin stooges. Of course, the Teamsters are pretending they didn't see this coming. Yeah. Yes, like me, you get a paycheck, working class. The Teamsters maneuvered them into a lockout instead of striking. What should I be searching, guys? Is there an article? What should I search? Tell me what to search, and we'll put something in there. Yeah, look shadow banned to me, Teflon. Look shadow banned to me. Like, I don't know how to find this. Right? No surprise. Right? They need this Donbass war to not be talked about. Right? They need this to not be talked about. That is the thing to do, by the way. Put the link in, but then put spaces and spread it out, and take out dots and put in brackets dot. You know what I mean? So that the algorithm doesn't see that it's a link, and then I'll put it in and I'll redo it, because that's what we have to do if we want to actually communicate like this. And for you, Victini, man, like I want to talk about this. I haven't been able to find anything about it. Right, so I'd like to see like a link. I'd like to see something to really formulate what's going on. No surprise. Like, why would they want people to know about this, right? This is the perfect. You know why this is the perfect time for labor action? Actually, Victini, spread this around to your buddies. By the way, because Canada has sent so many weapons to Ukraine, it no longer has the capacity to arm itself. Just putting that out there. Look up and Canadian media and see what they call it. It's a lockout management stranglehold. Look how the Canadian. Can you give me tell me what to search? Like, literally tell me what to search to find this story. Okay. Check out the WS CP lockout. Okay. There we go. WS. And then, what, lockout? Canadian Pacific lockout. Here you go, right? Here we go. World Socialist website, helping us out. This doesn't look too big. Let's just read it, because this sounds like a big fucking story. The Canadian Pacific lockout and UK ferry mass sackings, ruling class ruthlessness in response to growing class struggle. In response to growing resistance within the working class internationally to falling living standards, brutal working conditions, and the ongoing disaster triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic, the ruling class is reviving all its old methods of repression and class war, including lockouts, mass firings, and anti-strike court injunctions. Early Sunday morning, Canadian Pacific Railway shut down operations as a 72-hour lockout deadline previously issued by the company was reached. The 3,000 workers at the railroad, the sixth largest in North America, had voted nearly unanimously for strike action last month, determined to overturn work schedules that do not allow adequate rest and to secure major improvements to wages and pensions. The Teamsters Union, which has kept workers in the dark about its talks with CP throughout negotiations, belatedly issued a strike notice on Thursday. Aware of the anger among workers over the company's arrogant and dictatorial moves, the union, in an attempt at saving face, announced Saturday night that it was initiating a strike in addition to the company's lockout. Canadian and U.S. business interests are both braying for the government of Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to intervene to shut down the work stoppage. He should just declare an emergency, right? He's done that before. Canadian Chamber of Commerce President Perrin Beatty called on Liberal Labour Minister Seamus O'Regan to immediately bring forward legislation forcing a return to work, saying this work stoppage will have a deep and adverse impact for all Canadian business, both big and small, who rely on rail for their supply chain. This severe damage to Canadian supply chains at a time of heightened global uncertainty will extend beyond our borders and harm our reputation as a reliable partner in international trade. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've already harmed our reputation as a reliable partner in international trade by funding neo-Nazis. Don't you think? Don't you think? Last week, several U.S. Republican senators and the governor of North Dakota also sent separate letters demanding Trudeau intervene to block a work stoppage, pointing to the sharp run-up in fuel prices and agricultural supply shortages due to the war in Ukraine as justification. Canadian Pacific carries goods as far south as Kansas City in the U.S. and is a major transporter of crude oil and potash, a critical fertilizer ingredient. Behind the cynical professions of concern for the impact of rising gas and food prices on consumers, the ruling class is more and more demanding that austerity be imposed and workers' struggles suppressed in service of the national interest and preparations for war with Russia. Just the bloodthirst, right? The ruthless moves of Canadian Pacific management on one hand and the determination of rail workers to improve their living and working conditions on the other are part of a broader intensification of the class struggle internationally. In Britain, P&O Ferries fired its entire 800-person workforce on the spot Thursday. The company, which provides passenger and freight transport to several European ports, brought in private security guards to force workers to immediately gather up their belongings and vacate the ships, replacing them with agency contract workers, paid a fraction as much. In response, ferry workers in Hull initially drew up gangplanks and refused to allow police or replacement into their vessels, while workers in Dover blocked roads and access to the port, before security personnel eventually forced them to leave. On Friday, hundreds of workers and their family members demonstrated in the affected cities, chanting in Dover, "Seize the ships now." In India, over 70,000 workers with the Maharashtra State Road Transport Corporation bus agency have been striking for 20 weeks, repeatedly defying government back-to-work orders and threats of mass arrests. The walkout has taken place in opposition to roughly 24 trade unions, which bowed before the injunction and refused to sanction the strike. The workers are demanding that the agency be merged with the state government to secure better pay and benefits, as well as compensation to the families of 700 workers who have died from COVID-19. MSRTC has fired over 2,216 of the strikers and suspended another 12,270. In Spain, an estimated 75,000 truck drivers launched an indefinite strike last Monday over surging fuel prices and working conditions. The Spanish state, helmed by a coalition government between the Socialist Party and pseudo-left Podemos Party, has responded ferociously. Last week, a 33-year-old striker was shot and seriously wounded by an undercover cop. In the U.S., a federal judge last month upheld an anti-strike injunction against 17,000 BNSF rail workers. I'm just going to rifle through these because this is getting a bit... In Canada, the Trudeau government has thus far held off on directly intervening to end the rail work stoppage, instead pressuring the Teamsters to come to a deal with the company or accept binding arbitration. In the U.S., the White House has met with the United Steelworkers officials to block a strike by 30,000 oil refinery and petrochemical workers and impose the dictates of the energy giants, which are profiteering from an explosive run-up in oil prices. The USW has since touted the deal as one in which is responsible and does not add to inflationary pressures. A torrent of propaganda, the ruling class elites, all of this stuff. Yeah. To break out of the isolation imposed by the pro-corporate trade unions on their struggles, Workers require new organizations, rank-and-file factory and workplace committees, which base themselves on the methods of class struggle and an unrelenting fight for the needs of all workers. At the same time, the growing ruthlessness of the ruling class and its state demonstrates the need for workers to adopt a political perspective and program of their own, one which is dedicated to the mobilization of the working class internationally in the struggle for socialism and social equality and against war. I mean, back to work mandates are fascist. They're not fascist. They're literally they're literally serfdom, right? Like, no, you can't not sell your labor to us, right? That you must work for us. Like, get back to work or we arrest you, right? It's hilarious, but it isn't fascist. It's feudal. Like, that's the thing. That these workers aren't permitted to withhold their labor from us. They're our laborers, right? We own them, so we are going to force them back to work. Like, it's very feudal, right? So I understand your frustration, but it isn't fascist. It's feudal. I'm just imagining a T-shirt with, like, you know, the classic, like, Crusader look, the guy with, like, the helmet, like, and maybe, like, he can even have the cross on him or anything like that. And he's, like, holding a sword and he's got, like, the thumb up, right? And it says, it's not fascism, it's feudalism. The only bargaining chip workers have is to withhold labor. Yeah, to legislate them back to work removes all their bargaining power. Yeah. That was like one of the big complaints of the feudal system, right? That the feudal people, the people who lived under feudalism, and one of the great arguments for like why capitalism was supposed to be better was because it was supposed to allow feudal workers to be able to sell their labor wherever they would like. That instead of needing permission to leave from the feudal lord, they could just leave and then go somewhere else, right? That was supposed to free up the market, and that's where your old free market thing comes from. So when you say to people, hey, you don't have the right to withhold your labor, and we're going to force back to work legislation, well, you're basically just a feudal lord again, right? Which, incidentally, this gets worse than this by a lot. Like, we are returning, if we haven't already returned to feudalism, we're definitely heading in that direction. I've already seen plenty of arguments, or plenty of articles where workers have attempted to walk out and seek labor elsewhere, and they're legislated back to work. That they're literally not permitted to quit their job, right? Like this is where we're heading, and it's a reinstitution of feudalism by the working class, or by the ruling class rather, because as the project of extraction reaches its logical conclusion, which is that the wages can no longer pay the rent, and the wages no longer pay for goods, the whole system goes into something of a free-fall collapse. The workers basically say, well, what's the point of working? Like, what's the point of working for these people if it's not going to pay my rent, right? And so the ruling class's solution to this is just to round up the serfs and throw them into the factories the way that they did during the feudal period. Right, like the solution to these problems for the capitalists is just to go back to feudalism, which is what they'll do. They'll be happy to do it. They'll happily do it. Like and as the feudal structures begin to, I shouldn't say begin. Like the feudal structures are here. A business is a feudal kingdom. Like it's a feudal structure. Like Amazon is a feudal kingdom. Like that's how it operates. That's what it is, and we pretend like it's something different when it's not. The only thing that we argue makes it different from a explicitly feudal structure is that the serfs are permitted to go work elsewhere. Well, if that's the only job that's on offer, if that's the only thing that's providing wages, if that's the only thing, and how much longer until we just say no, it's a national security issue. We need to be able to distribute goods, and so if you we're just going to round people up and and leftists argue for this, right? Like you see this, leftists argue for make work projects, right? For guaranteed job stuff. It's like literally like just embed feudalism in the structure of your society don't provide a basic income, don't provide food and shelter, don't provide these things, right? Force people to go to work for the jobs that the ruling class say are worth doing, right? Like that's and so there's a section of leftists who argue in favor of their feudal enslavement, right? That's what's going on. Irony, forced labor. I still have not seen any evidence of the Uyghur cultural genocide that doesn't reference, ASPI and Adrian Zenz. Yeah, like, it's total bullshit. Yeah, Warren Buffett, a major shareholder. Yeah, you will sell your labor at the rate we decide on, yeah. Elon Musk enters the chat. Wouldn't that be hilarious? I thought he was too busy challenging Vladimir Putin to fistfights. We really need to discuss how these unions are in cahoots with the ruling class to maintain labor peace and act as an industrial police force. That's what they are. That is what they are. They pay us like peasants, might as well treat us like peasants. Yeah. No, I mean, like, the return to feudalism, like, it's feudalism with technology is all it is, right? It's like a techno-feudalism. That's what Yanis Varoufakis called it. I've been calling it neo-feudalism, right? But techno-feudalism has a nice ring to it, too. And it's just like, but the whole thing collapses anyway, because the rents are getting so outrageous, right? The rents are getting so off the mark, like they don't, it doesn't pay the bills anymore, right? Which is why it's so important that you fund my channel. Got a little dollar sign down here now. You could give me $1 just today. I'm so looking forward to the day where I don't need to do that shit anymore. I hope it happens sooner rather than later. Honestly. It's just so fucking dumb. Meanwhile, it's 70 degrees warmer than normal in eastern Antarctica. Scientists are flabbergasted. Like, when we lose control of this system, like when this system no longer is operating on our benefit, we're really going to lose control of it, eh? Like, it's not, it's, you see the hysteria that connects to things like the Ukrainian conflict, like the Ukrainian war, right? You see the hysteria that comes up on that. Just wait. Just wait until, like, climate change is in there. Just wait until it's famines. Just wait until it's, like, a very serious climate change event. That hysteria is what's going to seize hold, right? And if we do not have pockets of resistance or pockets of people who are willing to speak any kind of sense whatsoever, then the hysteria is going to take on an explicitly fascist element. Like, it will be explicitly fascist once the hysteria seizes hold. Because what this Ukrainian conflict has really convinced me is that we are incapable of dealing with crisis. Like, I was starting to say that we have gaps in our crisis management systems with COVID, right? But the Ukrainian crisis has really convinced me that we are incapable of dealing with crisis. And as these climate change crises start to sweep through, we will be incapable of dealing with them. And the hysteria is what's going to drive us. And we will be led into some absolute barbaric bullshit over it. It absolutely is going to go down that way. Jerry Diaz enters the chat, claps while Doug Ford announces a 10-cent increase to minimum wage. Jerry Diaz, who sat on the advisory board for Mr. Trudeau during the USMCA negotiation, true working class hero. My union local 183, Louisiana, is super apologist, corrupt collaborationist. Yeah, like, it really is getting to the point where the workers themselves, like, we need to surround the halls of power. Like, we need to rebel completely. That it's no long, like, there are no institutions that work on our behalf. They don't exist, right? That all of the institutions, all of them, right? Your unions, your churches, your banks, your hospitals, all of them, your media, all of it is completely corrupted by this neoliberal capitalist death cult. And they all operate on behalf of the cult. And what's the cult going to do? It's going to diminish your wages, diminish your security, diminish everything it possibly can, so that it can increase numbers in its own account offshore somewhere, right? Because the policy is abandonment. The policy is abandonment. That it's to extract as much wealth as we possibly can from the society, and as the society falls into collapse, abandon it. That's what it is. And the only time that we'll actually put any effort whatsoever into fighting back against workers who are disgruntled or anything like this is if they are doing something that is useful for our larger aims, like resource extraction or something like this, right? And I am more or less of the opinion that it's just a matter of time until these total psychopaths just outright say to the people who are striking, you no longer work here, and they just ship in like poor migrant workers, right? Like just get like 10,000 poor migrant workers and shove them into these places. Unions in Germany are also super regulated and constrained by law to be allowed to do only very, very few things. Things like strike or collective negotiation can literally be illegal. Yeah, isn't that hilarious? Like, imagine seeking permission, like to go to strike against the very people who you're striking against. Like that, a law like that is just not to be followed. Like it's like it'd be like Voldemort standing up and saying like it is illegal to fight against Voldemort. Like who gives a shit what he thinks about that? Like who cares about? And if he cried about how you're breaking the law, you'd just be like, what the fuck? Like I don't give a fuck about that law at all. That's not a law. We need organization. The problem is that the accepted forms of organization are no longer viable. Yeah, hence the ICFI trying to bring about a movement of rank and file committees separate from these unions. Yeah, that's the way to do it, right? We do need like an entirely new structure. The issue that this channel has, of course, is that we're too spread out. Like we're all over the place, right? But that's ostensibly what I'm attempting to do. I'm attempting to bring in like all of these disparate voices and trying to create a space, a safe space where we can all just figure out what's what, right? And figure out what page to get on and figure out where to fight. But like unpopular opinion, Canada needs nationalist autarky. I don't know what autarky is. This is Celsius, so it's 6 degrees Celsius right now. Become an insular, protect our borders. We live in a comparative paradise. We need to protect it, become self-reliant. I mean, I do agree with the concept that, like, we have to be able to produce stuff, right? Like to me, that's just a base national security concern. The idea that we've, like, gutted our manufacturing base, that we've, like, completely made it so that we don't actually make anything, and we're completely reliant on other nations to make our stuff for us, is dumb. Like it's just dumb. Like I don't even view this as like an ideology, right? Like I don't call that nationalist. It's not nationalist to say we should be able to make stuff. Like that's not a nationalist position. It's not a nationalist position to say we should have basic security. We should be able to produce our own goods and have stability in our own communities. Like, that's not nationalism, right? The reason why they call it nationalism, the reason why the ruling class in the media are calling such statements nationalism, is to scare people, to make it so that we go, well, we don't want to be nationalists. No, we don't want to be nationalists. No, we know what happens with nationalists. Only racists are nationalists. Only people like Hitler are nationalists. No, we don't want to be nationalists. Yeah. So we'll just continue capitulating to this international system, right? When it's not nationalist to say, hey, we should be able to make our own stuff. It seems like very basic, like very like it's a security issue, right? Like we should be able to make our own food. We should be able to have clean water. We should be able to have a livable environment. We should be able to produce our own goods, right? None of this is nationalism. None of it. Like it's just basic human living in your society. And if you didn't have those things, right, you wouldn't be able to live in your society, right? It's just insane. We just need to become self-sustaining for sure. Right? Become self-sustaining for sure. I know, buddy. Wait 20 minutes, okay, buddy? And I'll get you all the peanut butter you'd like, okay? But right now, we're doing some important work here. Like, we absolutely need to become self-sustaining, right? This, because what we've done is we've capitulated. Like, I was talking about this earlier. We've capitulated our ability to actually make stuff because of dollar hegemony, right? Like, and we've just used a financial system and a financial institution, which is no longer going to work. It's just not going to work. And if we continue attempting to use the financial system, the global south is going to form its own international model. It's going to form its own model of international trade with itself. That's Latin America, South America, Africa, the Middle East, China, Russia. They're going to form up, right? Basically anything outside of what we call the international community. Like, when we say the international community, we mean Europe, North America, sometimes Mexico, sometimes not, and Australia. That's what we mean when we say the international community here in North America. But there's like a huge amount of people and a huge amount of resources and a huge amount going on in what's called just glibly the global south, which is literally like an entire continent, another entire continent, and another entire continent, right? 3 major continents that we just like pretend aren't part of the conversation. And they're going to form up. And incidentally, they're the ones that are making everything. So like literally they're just going to look at us and be like, nah. And that's going to collapse our whole thing because we don't make anything. And if you stand up and say, hey, maybe we should be self-reliant and make anything, then you're a fucking nationalist. It's absurd. Nobody will rebel. Everyone has been indoctrinated to believe they only work harder one day. Well, I actually think the capitalist system generates its own rebellion, right? That once people can no longer pay rent, like once you're thrown into the streets, once you don't have access to food and shelter, right? You're going to rebel. Like it's beginning to come. It's beginning to happen. It's just that nobody really knows what's going on, right? And if somebody stands up and tries to point out what's going on, right? Oh, you're a Putin puppet. One of the biggest heads fakes these unions is national. One of the biggest head fakes these unions use is nationalism. It's pure poison to the working class. Yeah. We're a resource economy because the U.S. wants us to be like a South American country. Oh, yeah, for sure. That's the truth. I once made the mistake of suggesting to my partner, who's in a small union at their workplace, to try suggesting withholding labor, and I was told I don't understand the rules, should shut up. Yeah. No, the thing to do is just to keep negotiating, right? Just keep negotiating. That's all. Keep negotiating for scraps, and eventually you'll get the scraps when it's no longer valuable. That's the way it works, right? Like the fight for 15, right? Keep fighting for that $15, guys. Keep fighting for that $15. You're gonna get it. You're gonna get it, and it's gonna completely change the game when you get that $15. You bet. If the system has gone international by design, then the fight must, by necessity, be international. These unions are mostly against this. I espouse Trotskyism, but if Canada doesn't become independently strong, we can't fight hegemony. I mean, yeah, there is just the reality. Like, we have to be able to make stuff. Like, that's not, and that's not like, I just don't think that's an ism. like that's not an ideology. This is the thing. I think this specific conversation gets extremely muddy and gets muddied very much by this like propagandistic ideological talk. It's not an ideological position to say that people should have food and shelter. It's not an ideological position. It's become an ideological position by those incentivized to withhold those things, but it very strictly is not. If people do not have access to food and shelter, your system fails. It simply doesn't work. It's not an ideological position to say that a nation should have this, right? That a nation should have the basic security of being able to provide the base necessities for life for itself. We're told that this is an ideology by those who are incentivized to keep us from espousing base sense, right? So what you're saying is we should start by establishing a self-reliant social system in our own country first, kind of like a socialism in one country. I think I heard of that. Yeah, again, guys, let's not start swinging on the Trotskyism versus Stalinism thing, right? Like, again, I believe this very strongly. I believe this, like, almost above everything else, which is that our systems and our ruling class is interested in dividing us away from logical base shit that is not ideological in any way, that is strictly and fundamentally the truth. And they are attempting to do that by getting us to fight amongst one another along ideological lines. It's why I shut down the Trotsky versus Lenin versus Stalin shit in the chat, because it is exclusively divisive. It is actually not that helpful, right? It all it does is destroy the movement. That's it. That's all it does. Like, I am interested in what is real and what is here and what is happening on the ground in a fundamental way. And our enemies are the ones that are interested in having a like ideological conversation about it. But if you actually accept that the position of like, hey, food, shelter, safety, security, right? These base elements, these are non-ideological. Then once they start arguing against you, you can really legitimately start saying to them, why are you trying to not provide food and shelter for your people? Because that's fundamentally what they say. That's fundamentally what this is about, right? That they are trying to not let you have security, safety, food, and shelter. And that's the reason why things are going to explode, because food and shelter are not seen as a given in this society. That you have to sell yourself to a society that withholds food and shelter in order to get access to food and shelter. And so, of course, they're heavily incentivized to abuse this. And it's this abusive relationship that we talk about as communists, which, incidentally, is non-ideological. It's not an ideology to point out what is happening. Like, it's not an ideological position to say we have to sell ourselves to a market dominated by billionaires who are completely incentivized to reduce our wages to as low as they can possibly go, while we are incentivized to try to get wages that are as high as possible, which creates a central antagonism in the society. It's not an ideology. It's just what's happening. And they need it to be an ideological conversation because it's the only way that they can win. People need food and shelter. Does it need to be? It needs to be obtained in whatever system exists. Like, and we can talk about whatever system we'd like, but like, if people don't have food and shelter, then your system fails. It just doesn't work. Exhaust all options available. We cannot affect international policy. We can only affect our own. How about a system called democratic centralism? We have democratic centralism. It's strongly coerced by capitalism. I'm only engaging in discourse I find enlightening, not an argument. Communism is about theory and the implementation of it, not a cult of personalities. Leaders are only people. Linking up is essential to dealing with this. Yeah, like, I mean, we have to keep fighting, and we've got to fight along the lines that we can fight on. Like, that's, but we've got to face the reality that the union system that exists here in North America is no longer functioning. It doesn't do its basic job, right? Its basic job is to improve conditions for its members, and it doesn't do it, right? Because it's been coerced by capital, because capital has become so overwhelming, right? That, like, these owners, like these oligarchs, right? They've got so much power that they might as well be kings, right? Like, they literally, like, I'm a bit blown away that these owners are even negotiating. Like, most of these guys should just, like, and it has happened. We saw here, right? Even in this, right, where they just straight up were like, nah, here you go. P&O Ferries fired its entire 800 person workforce. Like, this is going to become the norm. Right? Eventually they are going to look at these guys and be like, they're too much of a pain in the ass, fired, and they'll just bring in the scabs, right? Like, that's what's going to happen. That is a lie they tell you to actually look to the systems that have actually succeeded in doing revolutions and building socialism. Yeah, what systems have succeeded in doing revolution and building socialism? Like, let's talk about that. I know, Milo, I'm ignoring you for 10 more minutes, buddy. For 10 more minutes, where I'm going to ignore you. Yeah. Sorry, buddy. 10 more minutes. I know. I love you too. You're such a good boy. Oh, you're coming over here for pets? You want some pets? No, you want peanut butter, dude. 10 minutes, bud. A homeless person is so vulnerable and at risk. It's unacceptable. Yeah. No, I mean, like, this is how you know, this is how you know the system has failed, right? A system that is like, if a person cannot walk into a building and say, I don't have shelter, and have shelter provided, your system fails. Like, that's the degree that I'm willing to take it. That, like, if you have erected a system that at any point tells your citizens to get fucked, you don't have access to food, you don't have access to shelter. If that is an acceptable outcome for your system, then your system should be abolished. That it doesn't actually function, it doesn't actually work. And if you're trying to tell me that it's acceptable for any system to be erected that excludes people from getting access to food and shelter, then there is only one ideologue in the conversation, and that's you. Right? It's not an ideological position to say everyone should have food and shelter. It's a fact of life. And if your system refuses to do it and actively abandons people and tells them to get their own food, find their own shelter, right? Then your system doesn't need to be tolerated at all, right? The people who are abandoned have every reason to fight against it and have every reason to try to dismantle it, because your system isn't it's a religious ideology. It's a cult. Like, that's why I call it a capitalist death cult. That's what we're looking at. And if we don't actually acknowledge this, that what we are facing up against is an ideological death cult, then we can't actually get anywhere. Like, I don't call this a capitalist death cult hyperbolically. I'm not saying it for the clicks. I'm saying it because it's actually the case. And how do you know it's an ideological death cult? Because it's removing basic necessities from the public on strictly ideological means. The primary demands of communists really have not changed almost at all since over a century. We want peace, we want land, homes, we want bread. We demand all powers to the workers. Yeah, we should drive home these basic points. And and it's not nationalist. Like, this is my big takeaway from this conversation that I'm having right here, right? It's not nationalist to say these things, right? Because these things are not ideological at all, right? They're intrinsically tied into the fabric of reality itself. That if you don't actually get food, you die, right? It's not an ideology. It's just a fact of life. And saying, hey, if we're going to abide as a citizen to a system that purports to be able to provide food and shelter for us, right, then it should do that. And if it doesn't, then we don't need to adhere to it whatsoever. Because what's being sold us is an ideology, right? The structures that are put in place are ideological, right? The demands of the populace are non-ideological. They are strictly material. Like, we need food, we need shelter. If your ideological power structure is not providing them, then we have no reason to abide by them whatsoever, right? And if that offends you, well, then you're the fucking Nazi in the conversation. You're the one that's saying that people who can't sell themselves are inferior subhumans. Like, that's what it fundamentally comes down to, right? Oh, you're disabled. Oh, you're elderly. Oh, you're poor. Oh, your skill set doesn't align with what we want. Well, that makes you a subhuman who should be abandoned. Sounds like a fucking Nazi to me. The United States rejects efforts by PRC officials to harass, intimidate, surveil, and abduct members of ethnic and religious minority groups, including those who seek safety abroad. Sanctions, baby. Again, if you sanction everything, like, if you sanction the world, you're the isolated one, right? Like, we're so fucking dumb. Like, we think that we're gonna sanction the world, and the world is gonna go, oh, I'm so sorry, sir. Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. Instead of looking at one another and saying, oh, hey, we could just trade with one another and exclude these psychopaths. Yeah, that's the eugenics case made by fascists, right? If you're weak, you should be purged, right? Which is essentially what we're doing, right? If you say to someone you can't participate in the labor market, then you deserve to be homeless, you deserve to be poor, right? Like, how is that any different than just purging the weak, right? Hunter Biden's laptop would have sunk Joe Biden's election. The DC newsrooms knew it. They covered it up. It's a total crisis. The FBI and the CIA have confirmed the Hunter Biden story. So anybody who is, I'm just reporting on this just to put it out there, anybody who is standing around saying, oh, that's just propaganda, that's just the MAGA hats, all that kind of stuff, well, the FBI and the CIA disagree. Yeah, this plays into this conversation, right? 71% of Canadians think housing is too expensive. Average Ontario housing prices are now up to 22.5 times people's disposable income. Is Canada's inflation rate getting out of control? Some economists worry it is. Wealth tax necessary to address income inequality. Hyper-stimulative policies are driving Canadian real estate prices, not supply. Canadian real estate prices expected to drop 24%, can crash 40%, Oxford economists. What's hilarious about this is even if it did, it would drop it back down to like 2018 levels, right? The Oxford economists, okay? I'm doing this because they're not economists, they're priests. They're finally starting to come around and be like, man, reality exists, eh? Oh, shit, we should actually probably pay attention to reality for a second. This collapsing of real estate prices is fucking not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen. Why? Because the wealth inequality has become so dramatic. It's become so hysterically absurd that the billionaire class doesn't care about selling the land, right? Like the whole concept of the market, right? The whole idea that these faux economists, these priests of neoliberalism, they've assumed in their thinking is that someone buys house and then turns and sells house. Someone buys house and then turns and sells house. Someone buys house and turns and sells house. And no one in the conversation has even bothered to contemplate and dwell and think upon the idea, what if buy house and keep house? What if buy house and keep house? And then just buy more house? And then buy another house, and another, 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 and never sell house. And why would they sell the house? They don't need the money. The reason why they're buying the house is because they've got so much money they don't know what else to buy. So they're buying the house for the land. Like they don't care that there's a house on it, right? And so this prediction from the Oxford economists, and again, though, even if it does collapse 40%, it still makes it way out of reach for the average Canadian, right? And what's the most embarrassing part of this whole thing is that we're not doing anything about it. We're not even trying to do anything about it. Like, I would be talking a bit of a different game if we were even attempting to confront any of this, if we were even attempting to do anything about it, but we're not. We're not. So this whole thing is just going to get way, way, way worse. Yep. You mean like BlackRock in the U.S. now buying up people's homes and then becoming the renter? Yeah. BlackRock and Vanguard, right? Like these guys own the country. And they're just starting to buy up because they don't know what else to do. They don't know what else to buy. They've run out of road. There's no more investments. There's no more anything. Right? They can't just get free money from people anymore. They've like run out of road. And so what are they doing? They're just buying up land because they don't know what else to do. Palmer raids, U.S. intervention in Russia's civil war, Communist Containment Act, Smith Act, trials of Communist Party leaders. Eugene V. Debs was arrested over half a dozen times. Yeah. Keep practicing your Mao face for when people argue about why landlords need to exist. Yeah. And it's going to get significantly worse. That's the thing that I'm just, we've got to be spreading this around. We've got to be informing people. I'm shouting about it every single day, right? Keep telling people I exist. Keep bringing people over in my channel. Keep spreading this around because the reality is the market's not going to correct itself, okay? There is no housing market anymore. It's gone. Okay? We live in a feudal society where the hyper-billionaire class, these billionaires that have hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, are buying up the land. They're buying up the housing market. And they are not interested in turning around and selling. They are not interested in turning around and letting you buy it. They simply don't care. They simply don't care. Right? They don't care if you're homeless. They don't care. The idea that they genuinely do care that you have housing, no, they don't. If they actually cared that you had housing, you'd have housing. They don't care. And they're more than willing to hoard these properties and hoard this wealth, because to them, each one of these houses represents wealth. It represents an asset that they have control of. And they would rather... You mean to say the Austrian school theories are kind of sucky? The Austrian school theories, and I'm no longer willing to say that this is done on accident. Like the Austrian school theories, the Chicago boys, all this kind of stuff, it was always propaganda. They were always propagandists. It's a religious ideology that they're spreading around. Canada is resource rich with only 38 million people. Nobody should be struggling. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let chaos reign. Get ready for madness. Good night, everyone. Yep, on that note, we have reached the time. I got to take care of my little dog. He's losing his little mind here. Aren't you just losing your little mind, my little guy? Always remember, guys, you are a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the vain hope that you'll not realize it and stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Watson, come in early and talk to me about this, bud. Like, I mean this. Talk to me about this early, okay? We can talk about it. Good luck. We're going to need it.